The Clone Wars' third year was not defined by an enemy the Republic failed to see. It was defined by warnings the Republic refused to hear. A clone trooper discovered the override buried inside every soldier's brain and was silenced before he could make anyone listen. A Jedi bombed her own temple to prove the Order had lost its way, and the Council expelled the wrong person for it. A Jedi general turned two clone battalions against each other in the dark, and the system that produced him changed nothing afterward. Mandalore, Maul built a criminal empire powerful enough to force Darth Sidious off his throne and onto the battlefield for the first time during the war. While the Republic fought its conventional campaigns across the Outer Rim, the real collapse was happening inside its own institutions. The Jedi Council suppressed evidence that the clone army had been commissioned by a man murdered by the Sith. Palpatine seized direct control of the banks. Ahsoka Tano walked away from the Order after the Council threw her to a military tribunal on fabricated evidence. And in the war's final hours, a former Sith Lord told her the full truth about Palpatine's plan and Anakin Skywalker's role in it. She chose to wait because speaking meant condemning the man she trusted most. Every warning arrived on time. Every institution that received it decided the truth was too dangerous to act on. The kill switch stayed buried. The investigation was suppressed. The Padawan who could have saved the Chosen One chose to wait. And when the Order finally came, there was no one left to stop it. Chapter 1: Deeper Deceptions. The Clone Wars' first 2 years had been fought between clearly defined sides. The Republic fielded clones and Jedi, the Separatists fielded droids and warlords, and battles were won or lost on terrain that both sides understood. The third year stripped that clarity away. Allies deceived each other, Jedi faked their own deaths to infiltrate criminal networks, Separatist agents operated inside Republic institutions so deeply embedded that identifying them required dismantling the institutions themselves, and the Chancellor of the Republic orchestrated crises on both sides of the conflict with a precision that no one in his government could detect because no one believed it was possible. The war had always been a deception, but in years 1 and 2, the deceptions ran in one direction, with Palpatine manipulating both sides from above. Year 3 introduced a new dynamic. The Jedi began deceiving their own people. The Separatists began deceiving their own allies, and the line between intelligence operation and institutional betrayal disappeared entirely. The war did not become more violent, it became more dishonest, and each new deception made the next one easier to justify. The first campaign of the period demonstrated that the Clone Wars had spread to environments the Republic's military had never been designed to fight in. The Separatists exploited the assassination of Mon Calamari King Yaz Kalina to fracture the planet's fragile peace between the Mon Calamari and the Quarren. Separatist commander Rev Tamsin, a Karkaradon sent by Dooku, manipulated Quarren chieftain Nasor Ree into turning against the Mon Calamari and supporting a Separatist occupation. The illegitimate heir to the throne, Prince Lee Char, was young, untested, and hunted from the moment the fighting began. The Separatists did not need to conquer Mon Cala's oceans. They needed to ensure that the planet's two species destroyed each other. The Republic responded with one of the most unconventional deployments of the war. Anakin, Ahsoka, Kit Fisto, and a contingent of clone troopers in pressurized underwater combat gear descended into Mon Cala's oceans alongside a Gungan Grand Army reinforcement from Naboo. The fighting was entirely subaquatic. Clone troopers trained for land warfare found themselves navigating coral formations and kelp forests, while aqua droids moved through the water with a speed and maneuverability that surface combat had never required them to counter. Explosions sent pressure waves that disoriented entire squads. The clones fought in 3 dimensions for the first time, with enemies attacking from above, below, and behind simultaneously. Tamsin pressed his advantage with Separatist Trident drills and Aqua Droid reinforcements that pushed the Republic's forces deeper into the city's structures. Lee Char was separated from his protectors multiple times. Kit Fisto's natural aquatic abilities made him one of the few Jedi who could match the environment, but the clone troopers around him were operating at the edge of their training. Ahsoka coordinated underwater squad movements, while Anakin fought alongside the Gungan warriors, whose deep-sea combat experience proved critical in holding corridors that the clones could not. For a Jedi who needed to control every variable on a battlefield, Mon Cala's oceans offered no control at all. The currents decided the terms. Anakin adapted, but the frustration of fighting an environment that would not obey him was a sensation he would carry forward. Tamsin's brutality ultimately turned the Quarren against him. Nasori watched the Karkardon commander strike down prisoners and intimidate civilians who had cooperated with the occupation, and recognized that the Separatists had no interest in Quarren sovereignty. They wanted Mon Cala's shipyards. Li Char rallied both species with a declaration that acknowledged Quarren grievances and offered genuine partnership rather than subjugation. The Quarren defected. Tamsin was killed in the final engagement. Li Char reclaimed the throne, with Captain Akbar at his side as his chief military advisor, beginning a relationship that would shape the galaxy's future far beyond this war. A prince who had been hunted through his own oceans hours earlier now governed a unified world because he had offered his enemies a seat at the table instead of a blade at the throat. The Republic had saved Mon Cala. The victory reinforced trust in a chain of command that was already compromised at its highest level. Under the Empire, the planet would be occupied and its shipyards seized. Akbar would carry the lessons of this battle into the Rebel Alliance, where Mon Calamari cruisers would form the backbone of the fleet that destroyed the second Death Star. The Republic's victory here built something that would outlast the Republic itself. The crisis on Mon Cala was a conventional military problem solved through unconventional means. What happened next on Naboo was something far more dangerous, a crisis where the Republic's own internal vulnerabilities were weaponized against it. Separatist agent Richelieu, a Gungan minister operating inside Boss Leonie's inner circle, used a mystical amulet to mind control the Gungan leader into ordering the Grand Army to march on Theed. Anakin discovered the amulet and destroyed it, freeing Leonie. When the liberated boss confronted Richelieu, the traitor stabbed him and fled. With Leonie unconscious, Representative Binks impersonated the boss to stand down the Gungan forces before they could attack the Naboo capital. General Grievous arrived on Naboo with a droid army, expecting Gungan cooperation. The Gungans deactivated the droid escorts and surrounded the cyborg general. General Tarpals stepped forward and engaged Grievous in single combat. The duel was uneven from the start. Grievous was faster, augmented by cybernetics that gave him reflexes no organic warrior could match. Tarpals fought with a weapon he had carried since the Battle of Naboo over a decade earlier, an electropole that crackled with energy each time it connected with Grievous's duranium frame. Grievous drove an electropole through Tarpals' chest. Tarpals did not fall. With his final act, he shoved the electropole directly into Grievous's torso, sending enough voltage through the cyborg systems to lock his limbs and drop him to the ground. The surrounding Gungan warriors swarmed the disabled general and took him into custody. Tarpals died on the field. The Republic had captured its most wanted military target, and it had cost the life of one of Naboo's most respected soldiers. Dooku tormented Anakin in front of Padme and forced her to release Grievous. The attachment the Jedi forbid had become a weapon in Separatist hands. Anakin had pursued Richelieu to an ancient Naboo structure where Count Dooku was waiting. Dooku killed the failed agent and overwhelmed Anakin, taking him prisoner. He then contacted Padme directly, tormenting Anakin via hologram and demanding Grievous's release in exchange for Anakin's life. Anakin was unconscious during the exchange, preventing either prisoner from identifying the other and preserving Dooku's operational security. Padme was faced with a choice that no senator should have been forced to make, and no Jedi should have created the conditions for. She chose Anakin. Grievous walked free. The Republic lost the highest value prisoner it had captured during the entire war, and Padme could never explain to the Senate why she had authorized the release, because doing so would have revealed the secret that made the leverage possible. The exchange worked precisely because Padme and Anakin's secret marriage gave Dooku leverage the Jedi Council did not know existed. The attachment Anakin had hidden from the Order for years had been identified by the Separatists and exploited as a strategic asset. Dooku's strategy bypassed combat entirely. He threatened Anakin in front of the woman who loved him and let the forbidden relationship do the rest. Each crisis the Republic survived left it more dependent on the systems Palpatine controlled. The escalation was quiet. It was also accelerating. Months later, the Jedi Council received intelligence that the Separatists were planning to kidnap Chancellor Palpatine during the Festival of Light on Naboo. The architect of the plot was Moralo Ival, a criminal strategist who had assembled a team of the galaxy's most dangerous bounty hunters for the operation. The Council needed someone inside the conspiracy before it reached execution. They chose Obi-Wan Kenobi. The mission required him to die. Obi-Wan staged his own assassination in a Coruscant street. The bounty hunter Rocco Hardeen shot him while he wore hidden body armor and a vital suppressant that mimicked death. Hardeen was captured afterward, and Obi-Wan took his identity. His funeral was held at the Jedi Temple. Anakin, Ahsoka, and Padme attended, and their grief was real because the Council had made a deliberate decision to keep them in the dark. Anakin's genuine rage and sorrow were needed to sell the deception to anyone watching. This was one of the first times the Jedi deliberately weaponized the emotions of one of their own. Obi-Wan underwent a nanotechnology facial transformation and vocal emulator implant that remade him into Hardeen. He was imprisoned alongside Ival and Cad Bane. The three staged a prison break and fled Republic custody together, with Obi-Wan maintaining his cover while navigating the criminal underworld from inside. Anakin did not grieve quietly. The loss hollowed him in ways that Ahsoka could see but could not reach. His command decisions became sharper and more aggressive. His patience with the Council evaporated. He channeled the pain into hunting Hardeen with an intensity that went beyond duty and into something personal, as though finding Obi-Wan's killer could undo the fact of his death. Ahsoka watched her master break and could do nothing about it because the damage was built on a lie she did not know was a lie. During a confrontation on Arandia, Obi-Wan was forced to subdue Anakin and whisper his identity to prevent the mission from collapsing entirely. The near disaster forced Yoda and Windu to officially inform Anakin of the truth. Anakin's reaction was not relief, it was betrayal. The Council had lied to him. Obi-Wan had lied to him. They manufactured his grief and used it as cover. The justification was operational necessity. The effect was another fracture between Anakin Skywalker and the institution he served. The Jedi Council faked Obi-Wan's death and let Anakin grieve a lie. The Order was teaching its chosen one that the people closest to him would deceive him whenever the mission required it. On Sereno, Dooku tested the kidnapping candidates inside the box, a massive mechanized death course designed by Moralo Ival. 11 bounty hunters entered, 5 survived. The challenges were lethal by design. The first chamber filled with poison gas, while the floor contracted towards a single elevated safe zone, forcing the hunters to climb over each other to survive. Electrified columns required split-second timing to pass between pulses that killed on contact. A sniper platform suspended over an open flame pit tested marksmanship under extreme duress, with the platform itself retracting segment by segment until only one firing position remained. Obi-Wan survived every test while maintaining his cover as Hardeen. Cad Bane saved him during one challenge when Ival rigged his weapon to fail, an act of professional self-interest rather than loyalty. The kidnapping attempt proceeded during the Festival of Light. The bounty hunters infiltrated the celebration using holographic disguise matrices to pose as Senate guards, blending seamlessly into the security detail. Darun, a Padawan bounty hunter whose species could absorb energy, disabled a ray shield generator protecting the Chancellor. Bane seized Palpatine. Obi-Wan blew his cover to stop the abduction and engage Bane directly, but Dooku had anticipated the infiltration. He had bugged Obi-Wan's sniper case and identified him as a Jedi from the beginning. Bane's operation was never the real threat, it was a diversion. While the Jedi focused on the bounty hunters, Dooku personally ambushed Palpatine in a separate location. Anakin intercepted Dooku. Their duel was fierce. Anakin seized Dooku by the throat with his mechanical hand during the fight before the Count broke free with lightning. Obi-Wan arrived, and together they drove Dooku off. The mission was technically a success. Palpatine was safe, and the conspiracy was dismantled. But Anakin had choked a Sith Lord with his bare hand in combat, and the Council had demonstrated that it considered deception an acceptable tool, even when deployed against its own members. The lesson Anakin absorbed was not the one the Council intended. They believed the Rocco Hardeen operation proved that difficult choices produced necessary results. Anakin learned that the people he trusted would lie to him and justify it afterward. When Palpatine eventually offered Anakin a relationship built on promise that he would never be deceived, the contrast with the Council's methods would not be subtle. Every deception the Jedi employed to protect the Republic also weakened the bonds holding it together. The Council could not see that these costs were cumulative because each individual operation appeared to succeed. The costs only became visible from the outside. Each compromise made the next compromise easier to authorize. By the time the Festival of Light was over, Anakin's trust in the Jedi Council had sustained damage that no apology could repair. Obi-Wan's friendship with Anakin survived, but the ease between them had been permanently altered, and Palpatine, who had watched the entire crisis unfold from the center of it, had learned something far more valuable than anything the bounty hunters or the Jedi had discovered. He had watched Anakin choke Count Dooku with his bare hand to protect them. The Chosen One's darkness surfaced fastest when the people he loved were threatened. That information was worth more than any kidnapping plot. On Umbara, the 501st was about to learn that a Jedi who had already decided the Republic would fall was more dangerous than any droid army. Chapter 2: The Umbara Betrayal. Umbara was a world built for ambush. The planet's surface received almost no natural sunlight. Bioluminescent vegetation cast the only illumination, shifting in color and intensity as organisms reacted to movement, heat, and sound. The jungle floor was layered with root systems that moved underfoot. Plants released toxic spores when disturbed. Predatory fauna hunted in coordinated packs through terrain so dark that standard clone helmet optics struggled to distinguish organic threats from the vegetation itself. Visibility was measured in meters. Every shadow could be a separatist position, a carnivorous organism, or both. The Republic deployed the 501st Legion as part of a full planetary invasion to retake Umbara from the Separatists. Anakin commanded the assault from the ground, leading his men through the initial push towards the capital. Umbaran militia forces used advanced weapons the clones had never encountered before, including mobile heavy cannons that punched through Republic armor and hover tanks that moved across the terrain with near-silent propulsion. The 501st took casualties on the approach. The terrain devoured formation discipline. Squads that maintained contact on open battlefields lost visual and comm connection within minutes of entering the jungle. Then, Anakin was recalled to Coruscant by the Chancellor. Anakin protested, but complied. His replacement arrived immediately. Jedi General Pong Krell was a basilisk with 4 arms and the physical presence to fill a room without speaking. Krell carried 2 double-bladed lightsabers and wielded them with a ferocity the 501st had never seen from a Jedi commander. He did not ask for tactical briefings. He assumed command and issued his first order within minutes of arrival. The order was a frontal charge on a fortified Umbaran position across open ground. Rex objected. The position was defended by heavy weapons emplacements with overlapping fields of fire. A frontal approach would funnel the 501st into a kill zone with no cover and no flanking options. Rex proposed an alternative route through the jungle that would allow the battalion to approach from the position's blind side. Krell dismissed the suggestion without discussion. He referred to Rex by his designation number, not his name. The charge proceeded as ordered. The 501st crossed open terrain under heavy fire. Clone troopers fell in the first seconds. Men who had survived Geonosis, Christophsis, and dozens of engagements died sprinting towards a position they could have flanked in an hour. Krell reviewed the casualty reports and declared the losses acceptable. Krell repeated this across every engagement. He ordered direct charges against positions that any competent commander would have bypassed or surrounded. When the 501st advanced on a fortified ridge held by Umbaran heavy cannons, Rex proposed sending a squad through a ravine to disable the cannons from behind. Krell rejected the plan and ordered a second frontal push up the ridge. The clones climbed through overlapping fields of fire while Umbaran gunners cut them down from elevated positions. The ridge was taken. The casualty list was longer than the first engagement. Krell noted the objective's capture and moved to the next target without acknowledging the dead. He dismissed every tactical suggestion Rex offered. He rejected flanking maneuvers, refused reconnaissance patrols, and treated the 501st veterans officers as interchangeable units whose experience had no value. When Rex and his men referred to each other by name, Krell corrected them. Clones had numbers. The system that manufactured them had built compliance into their conditioning, and the chain of command placed a Jedi General above every clone officer regardless of experience or proven judgment. Krell was not incompetent, he was deliberate. Krell sent the 501st into positions he knew would produce maximum losses. The 501st was being ground down, not by the Separatists, but by the Jedi General who was supposed to lead them. Fives and Jesse reached a breaking point. When Krell ordered another frontal charge against a heavily defended airbase, Fives proposed an alternative. A small team would steal Umbaran starfighters from the base's perimeter and use them to destroy the Separatist supply ship in orbit that was feeding reinforcements to the surface. The mission required disobeying Krell's direct orders. Fives and Jesse recruited Hardcase, a heavy weapons specialist whose appetite for destruction made him the most dangerous and the most expendable volunteer in the battalion. Hardcase had never met a weapon he did not want to fire, and never met an order he did not want to question. Among the 501st veterans, his recklessness was a liability in garrison and an asset in combat. Fives trusted him precisely because Hardcase operated on instinct rather than protocol. The three clones infiltrated the airbase and commandeered Umbaran starfighters. The controls were designed for Umbaran physiology and nearly impossible for human hands to operate. Hardcase adapted through trial and error, crashing through obstacles and firing weapon systems he barely understood. They reached the supply ship in orbit. The fighter's weapons could not penetrate the reactor's ray shields. Without hesitation, Hardcase exited his starfighter and manually hurled a detached missile pod into the reactor core. The supply ship detonated. Hardcase was killed instantly. He had known the moment the weapons failed that the only way through the shields was to deliver the ordnance by hand. He did not announce his decision. He simply grabbed the weapon and threw himself at the target. Fives and Jesse returned to the surface. The supply line was severed. Reinforcements to the Separatist garrison stopped arriving. By every military metric, the mission had succeeded. Krell ordered Fives and Jesse arrested for insubordination. He demanded they face judgment. The firing squad was assembled. Clone troopers who had fought beside Fives and Jesse for years stood in a line with their weapons raised. Rex stood before his men, blaster raised, and could not give the order. Fives spoke directly to the troopers holding the weapons. He told them that following this order meant ending their brothers for saving their lives. The firing squad lowered their weapons. Dogma, the clone who had been Krell's most vocal defender throughout the campaign, insisted the sentence be carried out. Fives and Jesse were spared, but the damage to unit cohesion was severe. The 501st was fracturing between clones who trusted their chain of command and clones who trusted their brothers. Something fundamental had shifted inside the battalion. Krell then issued the order that exposed everything. He informed Rex that Umbaran insurgents had obtained clone armor and were approaching the 501st position from the south. Simultaneously, he contacted the 212th Battalion operating in an adjacent sector and told them that enemy forces disguised in clone armor were approaching from the north. Both battalions mobilized. The 501st and the 212th met in the Umbaran jungle. In near total darkness, surrounded by bioluminescent vegetation that shifted with every movement, two Republic battalions opened fire on each other. Clone troopers shot their own brothers. The engagement lasted long enough for dozens of casualties to accumulate before anyone realized the truth. Blaster bolts that should have been aimed at droids struck armor painted with Republic insignia. Men screamed the names of their units into comms that were jammed by Umbaran interference. Squads that had fought side by side for 2 years fired into each other's positions because a Jedi General had told them the enemy was wearing their faces. In the strobing light of blaster fire, the clones could not see what they were shooting at. They could only hear the shots, the impacts, and the voices calling out designations that belonged to their own army. Trooper Waxter was hit during the engagement. The same clone who had painted Numa's face on his helmet after the liberation of Ryloth, who had carried a Twi'lek orphan through underground tunnels to save her village, was shot by soldiers wearing the same armor he wore. As he lay dying, Waxter removed his helmet. Rex knelt beside him and saw the face of a brother underneath. Waxter's eyes found Rex's. No words were necessary. Rex looked at the helmet in Waxter's hands, at Numa's face still painted on the surface, and understood what had happened. He ordered an immediate ceasefire. The two battalions stopped firing and counted their dead. Everybody on the ground was a brother. Waxter fell with Numa's face painted on his helmet. He was struck down by the 501st because a Jedi lied to them. Rex and Fives confronted Krell at the command post. They brought evidence of the false intelligence reports. Krell did not deny it. He dropped the pretense entirely. Krell had foreseen the Republic's fall through the Force. He had seen Sidious's plan succeeding, the Jedi destroyed, and a new order rising from the war's ashes. Rather than warn the Order or fight the Vision, Krell had decided to position himself on the winning side. He intended to deliver Umbara to Dooku as proof of his value and earn a place as the Count's new apprentice. Every reckless charge, every refused flanking maneuver, every clone lost in a frontal advance had been calculated to weaken the Republic's position on Umbara while maintaining the appearance of aggressive command. The clones had not been led by an incompetent general. They'd been led by a traitor who had decided their lives were currency to purchase his own survival. The system that placed Jedi in unchecked command of clone forces had produced the exact vulnerability it was never designed to address. Krell ignited his lightsabers and fought. 4 arms wielding 2 double-bladed weapons in a confined jungle created a combat zone that no individual clone could survive. He moved through the undergrowth with a speed that his massive frame should not have allowed, striking down troopers who came within reach and using the Force to hurl others into the jungle canopy. The clones could not match him in direct combat. They adapted. Rex coordinated teams to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, forcing Krell to defend in every direction at once. Troopers used cables and binders launched from distance, while other squads drew his attention with suppressive fire. They accepted that some of them would die closing the distance because the alternative was letting a 4-armed Jedi with precognition escape into the jungle he could disappear into permanently. Tup circled behind Krell's position during the chaos and stunned him from behind with a point-blank shot. The general collapsed. The question of what to do with him split the survivors. Military protocol required transporting Krell to Coruscant for trial. Fives argued that Krell was too dangerous to move. A Jedi who could manipulate 2 battalions into turning on each other from a command post could manipulate a transport crew just as easily. Rex agreed but could not bring himself to end a prisoner's life. He stood in the brig with his blaster drawn and his hands steady and did not fire. The weight of what Krell had done pressed against the weight of what ending him would mean. Taking the life of a restrained prisoner was not what clones were supposed to do, but nothing about Umbara had been about what clones were supposed to experience. Fives stepped back. He did not reach for the weapon. He looked at Rex, and both men understood that neither of them could carry this and remain who they were afterward. Dogma took the blaster. The clone who had defended Krell's authority more fiercely than anyone in the 501st, who had reported Fives and Jesse for insubordination, who had insisted that the chain of command existed for a reason, and that soldiers did not get to choose which orders they followed, raised the weapon and fired. Krell fell in the brig of his own command post, struck down by the soldier who had believed in him longest. The other clones watched Dogma's face as he lowered the blaster. What they saw was not rage or satisfaction, it was the expression of a man who had just learned that the thing he had built his entire identity around had been hollow from the start. Dogma's arc was Umbara's moral engine. He did not strike Krell down because he had stopped believing in the system. He struck Krell down because the system had put a traitor in command, and Dogma's faith in authority had been the instrument that kept the traitor in power. Every order Dogma had enforced, every insubordination report he had filed, every time he had told Fives to shut up and follow the chain of command, had served Krell's betrayal. Dogma did not lose his faith on Umbara. He discovered what his faith had been protecting. The 501st won the Battle of Umbara. Umbara was secured, and the Separatist garrison was defeated. Victory was entered into Republic military records alongside casualty figures that did not distinguish between clones lost to droids and clones lost to their own brothers. Rex filed his after-action report. The Jedi Council reviewed the findings. Krell was recorded as a traitor. No systemic review of Jedi command authority over clone forces was initiated. No protocol changes addressed the possibility that another Jedi general might turn. The Council treated Krell as an aberration rather than a symptom, and the system that had given him unchecked authority over men who could not refuse his orders remained intact. Another safeguard that might have prevented catastrophe was left unbuilt. The clones who survived Umbara returned to the war carrying knowledge that the Jedi Council had never intended them to possess, A Jedi could betray them. A Jedi could lie to them. A Jedi could send them to die for reasons that had nothing to do with the Republic and everything to do with personal ambition. The chain of command that was supposed to protect them had been weaponized against them by the person sitting at its top. Umbara did not create the conditions for Order 66, but it removed one of the psychological barriers that might have slowed it down. When the Order came to eliminate every Jedi in the galaxy, the clones who remembered Krell had already learned that a Jedi General's robes did not guarantee the person wearing them was on their side. The chips would have compelled obedience regardless, but for the veterans of Umbara, the Order would not have felt as impossible as it should have. On Zygerria, Anakin Skywalker was about to confront the one thing he feared more than losing the people he loved. He was about to become the thing that had owned him. Chapter 3: Chains and Resurrection. The entire Togruta colony of Kiros had vanished. The planet had been under Separatist occupation, but when Republic forces liberated it, the colonists were gone. No bodies, no mass graves, no evidence of bombardment or evacuation. The population had been removed intact. The Clone Wars had always been fought over territory, resources, and political alignment. The disappearance of Kiros revealed that Year 3 was dragging older horrors back into the conflict. Slavery, genocide, and madness surfaced across 3 arcs that had nothing to do with clone battalions or droid foundries, and everything to do with what the war was uncovering beneath the galaxy's surface. On Zygerria, the Republic's strongest knight was forced to wear a slaver's clothes on a world that trafficked in the thing he feared most. On Dathomir, an entire civilization was wiped out because one woman had tried to strike down Count Dooku. And on a junk world at the edge of known space, a dead man who had spent a decade feeding on hatred was pulled from the wreckage and given new legs and a restored mind. The war was no longer just producing casualties, it was resurrecting things the galaxy had buried. Entire populations were now treated as expendable. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Rex traced the missing colonists to the Zygerrian slave empire, a civilization that had practiced institutionalized slavery for millennia before the Republic outlawed the trade. The Clone Wars had weakened enforcement across the Outer Rim. The Zygerrians saw opportunity in the chaos and resumed operations at industrial scale. With Dooku's tacit approval providing political cover, the rescue mission required infiltration. Anakin posed as a slaver, bringing Ahsoka as his captive to the Zygerrian royal auction. Anakin Skywalker had been a slave on Tatooine until the age of 9. He had been property. He had worn a transmitter chip in his body that would have detonated if he tried to escape. His mother had remained enslaved for years until a moisture farmer purchased and freed her. She was later abducted by Tusken Raiders and died in captivity. Every memory Anakin carried from his childhood was shaped by the experience of being owned. Now he stood in a slaver's robes on a world that celebrated the ownership of sentient beings as cultural heritage. Auction halls displayed people sold by weight and species. Buyers inspected captives the way farmers inspected livestock. The Zygerrian queen Mirage Sintel tested his cover by ordering him to use an electro whip on Obi-Wan in front of the auction crowd after Obi-Wan's cover as a slave had been blown. The man inside the disguise was being asked to harm his own master to maintain a fiction that turned his stomach. Obi-Wan and Rex were captured and transported to the Kadavo slave processing facility, a labor camp suspended above a volcanic caldera where disobedience was punished by deactivating the platform sections beneath the prisoners' feet and dropping them into the lava below. The facility's overseer, Keeper Agrus, used starvation, exhaustion, and the constant threat of the caldera to maintain compliance. Obi-Wan was forced to watch Togruta colonists broken through labor and terror while his hands were bound and his lightsaber was locked in a storage vault 3 levels above him. Rex endured the same conditions alongside the slaves he had come to rescue, indistinguishable from them in his prisoner's uniform, stripped of his armor and his rank, and reduced to another body on the work line. Ahsoka was held in the royal palace, where Sintel attempted to recruit her as a personal attendant. The Zygerrian queen saw Ahsoka's defiance as a challenge to be broken rather than a threat to be eliminated. Sintel's interest in Anakin was equally possessive. She recognized his power and wanted to own it the way she owned everything else on Zygerria. The dynamic between Anakin and Sintel operated on a frequency that the other Jedi could not fully see. Sintel was attracted to Anakin's darkness. Anakin's darkness responded because this world was the one thing in the galaxy guaranteed to trigger it. The Republic manufactured soldiers in vats and never asked whether the men it was buying had the right to refuse. The difference between Zygerrian slavery and Kamino's production lines was a matter of vocabulary. Plo Koon arrived with a Republic fleet and provided air support for the extraction. Anakin's restraint collapsed the moment the operation shifted from infiltration to combat. He fought through the Zygerrian guards with a ferocity that went beyond tactical necessity. The slavers were not just enemies, they were the embodiment of everything he had spent his life trying to escape, and the violence he directed at them carried a charge that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with the boy who had once been sold. The Kadavo facility was destroyed. The Togruta colonists were rescued. Obi-Wan and Rex were recovered. Agruss fell when Rex drove an electrostaff through him after the Overseer attempted to drop the remaining slaves into the caldera during the evacuation. It did not address the structural parallel that the Zygerrian Ark had placed directly in front of the Jedi Order's face. The Republic had liberated slaves on Zygerria using an army of men who had been manufactured without consent, conditioned for obedience, and deployed to battlefields they had no voice in choosing. The clones were not called slaves. They were called soldiers. The distinction was legal. It was not moral. Anakin could not see the parallel because seeing it would have required him to question the institution that had freed him from Tatooine and given him purpose. The Jedi could not see it because acknowledging it would have meant confronting the fact that their entire war depended on a labor force that had never been asked whether it wanted to fight. The galaxy's oldest crime had not been abolished. It had been rebranded. Each moral boundary the war eroded made the next erosion less visible. While Anakin confronted the horrors of Zygerria, Count Dooku was preparing to erase an entire civilization from the galaxy. The Night Sister massacre was Dooku's retaliation for Ventress's repeated assassination attempts, but it later served a deeper purpose. The Night Sisters practiced a dark side tradition that operated entirely outside Sith doctrine. Talzin's magic could not be controlled by the Sith, could not be predicted by them, and had already been used against Dooku directly. The massacre was not just revenge, it was the Sith ensuring that no rival dark side tradition survived to challenge their monopoly. Dooku's order to Grievous was explicit: go to Dathomir and destroy the Night Sisters. All of them. Grievous arrived with a fleet large enough to devastate the planet's surface. Droid landing craft ascended through Dathomir's atmosphere in waves. Battle droids marched into the forest where the Night Sisters had lived for generations. Ventress led the defense. She organized the surviving Night Sisters into ambush formations that exploited their knowledge of the terrain. The initial engagements favored the defenders. Night Sister warriors used Dark Forest to isolate droid patrols and destroy them before reinforcements could arrive. Ventress personally engaged Grievous in single combat and bested him, driving him backward through the undergrowth with a combination of lightsaber technique and Dathomirian magic that the cyborg general could not counter. But Grievous did not fight with honor. When Ventress gained the advantage, he ordered his droids to resume firing despite their single combat agreement. The forest filled with blaster bolts. Night Sisters fell. In the hidden cave beneath Dathomir's surface, the eldest Night Sister, Ol Daka, performed the chant of resurrection. Dead Night Sister warriors rose from their graves and joined the fight. An army of the undead poured from the cave mouth and crashed into the droid lines. Simultaneously, Mother Talzin used a voodoo effigy to torment Dooku remotely from across the galaxy. The Count convulsed aboard his ship and ordered Grievous to find the source. Grievous stormed the hidden cave with a contingent of commando droids. He found Ol Daka performing the chant and struck her down with a lightsaber. The moment Daka died, every resurrected Night Sister collapsed and the spell was broken. Grievous's droids swept through the remaining defenders. The Night Sisters were wiped out. Ventress survived. She fled into the forest of Dathomir, wounded, grieving, and alone. Talzin survived by dissolving into green mist before Grievous could reach her. The Night Sister clan was functionally extinct. An entire dark side tradition, distinct from the Sith, rooted in centuries of matriarchal ritual and connected to the Force through pathways the Jedi had never studied, was erased in a single afternoon because Count Dooku wanted revenge on one woman. The Sith's response to defiance was annihilation, and the galaxy barely noticed. Dooku ordered an entire civilization destroyed because Ventress had tried to strike him down. Dathomir's dark side tradition, the only alternative to the Sith, was gone. The Night Sisters were dead, but Dathomir had one final act to perform. Savage Opress had been searching for his brother since Mother Talzin gave him the Talisman of Finding at the end of Year 2. The talisman led him to Lothal Minor, a junk world at the edge of the Outer Rim where the galaxy's waste accumulated in mountains of scrap metal and toxic refuse. Savage descended into the planet's subterranean tunnels, guided by the talisman's pull and harassed by the junk world's scavenger creatures. He found Maul deep underground. Darth Maul had survived being cut in half by Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo over a decade earlier. He had dragged himself through a garbage chute, fallen through space, and landed on Lothal Minor, where he had constructed crude spider-like legs from scrap metal and lived in tunnels like an animal. His mind was shattered. He alternated between weeping, snarling, and muttering fragments of memory, recognizing almost nothing of who he had been. The only coherent thought that had survived a decade of madness was a single word: revenge. Savage brought Maul to Dathomir. Mother Talzin materialized from green mist, removed the spider legs, and forged new bipedal cybernetic legs from destroyed battle droid parts left over from the massacre. She restored Maul's sanity through Night Sister magic. The man who emerged from the ritual was coherent, focused, and consumed by a hatred that 10 years of insanity had refined rather than diminished. Maul's first act was to announce himself. He traveled to the village of Raydonia and wiped out its entire civilian population, then transmitted a holographic recording to the Jedi Temple, challenging Obi-Wan Kenobi to come and face him. The devastation had no military purpose. It was a signal flare designed to draw one specific Jedi across the galaxy. Obi-Wan came alone. Maul and Savage ambushed him, disarmed him, and captured him aboard their freighter. They intended to make him suffer until there was nothing left. Asajj Ventress boarded the ship independently. She had spotted the bounty on Savage at a cantina on Tatooine and came for the credits, not to rescue anyone. She freed Obi-Wan and lent him one of her red lightsabers. The four combatants fought a 2-on-2 duel through the freighter's corridors. Maul taunted Obi-Wan about ending Qui-Gon Jinn. The duel was vicious but inconclusive. Obi-Wan and Ventress, outmatched in raw power, retreated into the cockpit and jettisoned it as an escape pod. Maul and Savage were left aboard the freighter. Maul did not pursue. He had confirmed that Obi-Wan still lived, that the Jedi still feared him, and that his own power had returned. The galaxy had a new predator, operating outside the Sith's control, answering to no master, and driven by a grudge that had outlasted a decade of madness and a body cut in half. Maul had new legs, a restored mind, and a hatred that had survived 10 years of insanity. The dark side now had a third faction, something older and angrier than Sith or Night Sister. The period also produced a smaller but significant encounter. Lux Bonteri, the son of the fallen Separatist Peace Senator Mina Bonteri, sought revenge against Dooku by allying with Death Watch on the frozen world of Karlak. Ahsoka accompanied him and witnessed Death Watch's methods firsthand. Pre Vizsla's warriors occupied a Mingpo village, kidnapped women as laborers, and burned the settlement when the villagers protested. Vizsla struck down a chieftain's granddaughter with the darksaber in front of her family to establish dominance. Ahsoka fought Vizsla directly. Their duel was brief but fierce, darksaber against dual lightsabers. Ahsoka sliced through Vizsla's jetpack, causing it to explode, and escaped with Lux aboard a speeder. The encounter was minor compared to the arc's other events. What it gave Ahsoka was first-hand knowledge of what Death Watch did to civilians when no one was watching. The war's third year had dragged the galaxy's oldest horrors into the open. Slavery had returned at industrial scale. A civilization had been wiped out for the crime of producing one defined woman, and a man who should have been dead had rebuilt himself from madness and scrap metal and was now hunting the Jedi who had cut him in half. The conventional war between clones and droids was still being fought across the Outer Rim, but the forces gathering in the shadows were older, angrier, and far less predictable than anything the Republic's armies had been built to face. On Onderon, the Republic was about to arm a planet's people instead of conquering it. The template they built would outlast the Republic itself. Chapter 4: The Shadow Collective. In a matter of weeks, a former Sith Lord with no army, no territory, and no institutional support built a criminal empire that overthrew a legitimate government, united the galaxy's most powerful crime syndicates under a single command structure, and forced Darth Sidious off his throne and onto the battlefield for the first time during the war. The Separatists had spent 3 years trying to accomplish a fraction of what Darth Maul achieved with a handful of criminals and a grudge. They had deployed superweapons, biological agents, and terrorist operations across hundreds of worlds. They had assassinated senators, bombed capital cities, and blockaded neutral systems. None of it had produced a rival power structure capable of threatening the Sith's control over the dark side or the Republic's grip on galactic governance. Maul did both before the Republic even realized he was alive. Power no longer required legitimacy. Before Maul's empire building began, the Republic conducted an experiment on the jungle world of Onderon that would reshape the galaxy's future far beyond the Clone Wars. The Jedi Council authorized Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Rex to covertly train local insurgents against the separatist-backed puppet, King Sanjay Rash. The operation was not a military deployment. No clone battalions were sent. No Republic warships entered Onderon's orbit. The mission was advisory, to teach rebels to fight and then leave. The rebels were led by 2 siblings. Zygerria was the strategic mind, a natural leader who understood that an insurgency could not survive on firepower alone. It needed the population's support, and earning that support required discipline, restraint, and visible moral authority. Her brother Saw was the opposite. He was aggressive, impulsive, and convinced that escalation was the only language the Separatists understood. The tension between them defined the rebellion's character. Steela pushed towards precision, Saw pulled towards force. Both approaches were necessary, and neither alone would have been sufficient. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Rex provided initial combat training in a jungle camp outside the capital city of Iziz. The rebels learned ambush tactics, demolition techniques, and small unit coordination suited to urban guerrilla warfare in Iziz's narrow streets and elevated walkways. After the training phase, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Rex departed. Ahsoka remained as the sole Jedi advisor, operating under a mandate to guide but not directly fight. Ahsoka's position on Onderon tested her in ways that conventional combat never had. She trained people who would die using the skills she taught them, and she could not fight beside them when they did. Ahsoka watched rebels she had coached through ambush drills carried back to camp on improvised stretchers. In after-action briefings, she corrected tactical errors knowing that the next engagement would produce new casualties she was forbidden from preventing. The mandate to advise but not intervene put her in a position where she carried the emotional weight of command without the authority to act on it. The rebellion gained momentum through a series of escalating engagements inside Iziz. The rebels ambushed droid patrols, disrupted supply convoys, and broadcast messages to the civilian population calling for resistance against the occupation. Rash responded with increased droid presence and public displays of force designed to intimidate the population into compliance. Every act of separatist brutality pushed more Onderonians towards the insurgency. The Republic's contribution was not limited to training. Anakin paid Hondo Ohnaka to deliver Cinar rocket launchers to the rebel camp, providing the insurgents with the one weapon they lacked: the ability to destroy the separatist gunships. Hondo arrived aboard the Fortune and Glory and delivered the launchers with his usual theatrical flair. The rockets could penetrate the ray shields that protected the HMP droid gunships dominating Onderon's skies. Without them, the rebels had no answer for air superiority. With them, the final battle became possible. The uprising's climax cost the rebellion its best leader. During the final engagement outside Iziz, Saw shot down the last separatist gunship with a rocket launcher. The destroyed gunship crashed near the cliff where Steela and the restored King Dendub were standing, destabilizing the edge. Steela threw Dendub to safety but was left clinging to the crumbling ledge. Ahsoka reached out through the Force and lifted Steela from the cliff face. For a moment, it held. Then, the downed gunship's still functional turret fired a blast that struck Ahsoka in the shoulder. The impact broke her concentration. Steela fell. She died on the rocks below. Saw reached her body before anyone else. He held his sister and did not speak. Zygerria died because a downed gunship's turret hit Ahsoka at the wrong moment. Her brother Saw survived, and his grief would fuel decades of insurgency the rebellion itself would one day call too extreme. General Kalani, the super tactical droid commanding the Separatist garrison, received orders from Dooku to withdraw from Onderon directly. King Rash protested the abandonment. Kalani struck him down on Dooku's authority. The Puppet King was discarded the moment his usefulness ended. Onderon was free, and Dundub was restored to the throne. The Jedi Council recorded the operation as a success. The template the Republic built on Onderon was the first proxy insurgency of the Clone Wars. Instead of occupying a planet with clone armies, the Republic had armed and trained a local population to liberate itself. The approach was cheaper, less visible, and produced a result that appeared organic rather than imposed. It was also the exact methodology the Rebel Alliance would use against the Empire 2 decades later. Saw Gerrera would be among the first to apply it. Steela's death had burned away whatever restraint her brother possessed. By the time of Rogue One, Saw's methods had become so extreme that the Alliance severed ties with him. The insurgent the Jedi had trained on Onderon became a weapon no one could control. The Republic had built a template it could not contain. Ahsoka carried Steela's death differently than Saw did. She had held Steela in the Force and lost her. The failure was not tactical. It was physical. A blaster bolt had hit her shoulder at the worst possible moment, and a woman had died because Ahsoka's body could not absorb the impact. The experience reinforced something the hunting moon of Waska had already begun to teach her. The galaxy did not care how hard you tried. It punished failure with finality, regardless of intent. While the Republic experimented with insurgency on Onderon, Maul was building something far more ambitious. The war's erosion of galactic order had created vacuums that a conventional military could not fill. Maul intended to fill them himself. The path to the Shadow Collective began with a failure on Florum. Maul and Savage raided Hondo Ohnaka's pirate base, attempting to recruit his gang by force. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Master Adi Gallia intercepted them. The engagement was vicious. Savage struck down Adi Gallia during close combat, goring her before she could disengage. Obi-Wan, in rage, severed Savage's left arm in retaliation. Maul and Savage retreated in defeat, badly wounded and adrift. Death Watch scouts discovered the unconscious brothers and brought them to their camp on Zanbar. When Maul recovered, he saw an opportunity. He proposed an alliance. Vizsla wanted Mandalore. Maul wanted a base of operations and a military force loyal to him. Together, they could take the planet and share the spoils. Vizsla agreed because he believed he could use the Sith brothers and discard them once Mandalore was secure. Maul agreed because he believed the same thing about Vizsla. The Shadow Collective expanded rapidly. Maul and Savage traveled to Mustafar and eliminated Black Sun's leadership when they refused to join. The Pike Syndicate signed on after Maul demonstrated what happened to organizations that declined his offer. The Hutt clan required more persuasion. Maul and Savage fought through Jabba's palace guards, overwhelming bounty hunters and enforcers who tried to stop them in the corridors, and presented their terms to the Hutt Council directly. The Hutts had control of the galaxy's criminal economy for centuries and did not accept ultimatums from anyone. Maul was not offering an ultimatum, he was offering a demonstration. The Hutts looked at the bodies of their guards on the floor and joined. Within weeks, the Shadow Collective controlled the galaxy's largest criminal networks, its most lucrative smuggling routes, and a Mandalorian army equipped with Beskar armor and jetpacks. The speed of the consolidation revealed how fragile the galaxy's power structures had become. The plan for Mandalore was elegant in its cynicism. The Shadow Collective's criminal elements would stage attacks across Sundari, intimidating the civilian population and creating a crisis that Duchess Satine's pacifist government could not contain. Death Watch would then arrive as liberators, crushing the criminals in public view and positioning Vizsla as the savior Mandalore needed. Satine's government would collapse under the weight of its own demonstrated failure. The coup would appear organic. The population would welcome it. The plan worked exactly as designed. Criminal gangs rampaged through Sundari's streets. Citizens were robbed, businesses were destroyed, and Satine's police force was overwhelmed. The Death Watch stormed the city in full armor, engaging criminals in coordinated street battles that the population watched from behind barricaded windows. The criminals fell. Death Watch stood over the wreckage as heroes. Satine was deposed. Vizsla claimed the throne of Mandalore. Then, Vizsla betrayed Maul. He imprisoned both brothers, calculating that the Sith had served their purpose and were no longer needed. Maul and Savage escaped their cell, and Maul challenged Vizsla to single combat for the right to rule Mandalore under ancient Mandalorian tradition. Vizsla accepted because refusing would have cost him the loyalty of his own warriors. The duel was fought in the throne room of Sundari's royal palace. Vizsla used every weapon in his arsenal: the darksaber, his jetpack, wrist-mounted rockets, flamethrowers, and gauntlet blades. Maul absorbed the punishment, adapted to the Mandalorian fighting style, and dismantled Vizsla's defenses one system at a time. When Vizsla was disarmed and beaten, Maul took the darksaber and struck him down with his own weapon. Death Watch fractured. Warriors loyal to Vizsla's memory refused to follow a Sith. Bo-Katan Kryze led the Night Owls in open opposition to Maul's rule. The Loyalist faction, including Rook Kast and Gar Saxon, accepted Maul's claim because the combat had been fought under Mandalorian law. Maul now controlled Mandalore, the Shadow Collective, and the Darksaber. He had built a power base larger than anything the Separatists had achieved through 3 years of conventional warfare. Maul claimed the Darksaber and the throne. A former Sith Lord with nothing had built more in weeks than the entire Separatist war machine had built in 3 years. Obi-Wan infiltrated Mandalore in a desperate attempt to rescue Satine. He was captured. Maul brought Satine before Obi-Wan and struck her down with the Darksaber while Obi-Wan watched. The act was deliberate, unhurried, and designed to inflict maximum suffering on the Jedi who had taken Maul's legs on Naboo. Satine's final words were a declaration of love that Obi-Wan had spent his entire adult life unable to answer in the way she needed. The woman who had told Obi-Wan she loved him aboard the Coronet during Year 2, who had learned that he would have left the order for her, fell in front of him at the hands of a man who understood exactly what she meant to him. Bo-Katan's Night Owls rescued Obi-Wan before Maul could finish what he had started. Obi-Wan escaped Mandalore carrying a grief that would never fully heal. The Jedi Code's prohibition on attachment had not protected Obi-Wan from loss. It had only ensured that when the loss came, he would bear it alone. Obi-Wan's path and Anakin's path continued to mirror each other. Obi-Wan lost the woman he loved because he chose duty. Anakin would lose everything because he chose love. The Code failed both of them. Maul's growing power triggered the one response he had not anticipated. Darth Sidious sensed a rival through the Force and traveled to Mandalore personally. This was the first time during the Clone Wars that Sidious left Coruscant to confront a threat directly. He arrived in the throne room where Maul sat with the Darksaber and ignited 2 crimson lightsabers. The duel was not competitive. Sidious fought Maul and Savage simultaneously and dominated both. He struck down Savage Opress first, driving a blade through him while Maul watched. With Savage dead, Sidious turned his full attention to Maul and dismantled him. Lightning, telekinesis, and saber work that operated at a level Maul could not match reduced the self-proclaimed crime lord to a broken figure crawling across the throne room floor. Sidious did not end him. He told Maul that he had other uses for him. The message was absolute. Maul had built an empire. Sidious had destroyed it in minutes. The difference between them was not power, it was patience. Maul acted on ambition, Sidious acted on design. One produced a criminal network, the other was producing a galactic empire. Every rival who rose during the Clone Wars served Sidious's purpose by revealing itself and being destroyed. A bomb had detonated inside the Jedi Temple, and the person responsible was not a Sith, not a bounty hunter, and not a Separatist. She was a Jedi. Chapter 5. The Wrong Jedi. The Jedi Temple had been attacked before. Cad Bane had breached its vaults during Year 2 and escaped with a holocron containing the locations of every Force-sensitive child in the galaxy. That infiltration had been the work of an outsider, a mercenary hired by the Sith to exploit gaps in security the Order had never addressed. The bombing that struck the temple during Year 3 was different. It came from inside. The person who planned it, funded it, and executed it was a Jedi, and the person the Order blamed for it was the Padawan who had done more to earn the Republic's trust than anyone her age had a right to. Ahsoka Tano was framed for the bombing, expelled from the Jedi Order, and put on trial for murder. When the truth finally emerged, it vindicated her and condemned the Order in the same breath. Ahsoka walked away from the Jedi, not because they had failed to protect her, but because their response to this crisis proved that protecting her had never been the priority. The fractures the war had opened inside the Order were about to become visible to everyone. The bombing targeted the Jedi Temple hangar on Coruscant. 6 Jedi died in the blast, including Umbara, along with clone troopers and temple maintenance workers. It ripped through the hangar's main bay, destroyed several starfighters, and sent debris into the surrounding corridor. The damage was structural and psychological. This was not just a military headquarters, it was a monastery, a school, and a home. Younglings trained in rooms adjacent to the hangar. Padawans studied in archives one level above the blast zone. The bombing did not just take lives, it violated a sanctuary. The investigation revealed that the bomber was Letta Turman, a civilian with no force sensitivity and no military training. Turman had fed explosive nanodroids to her husband, Jakar Bomani, a munitions expert and a foreman assigned to the temple hangar. The nanodroids accumulated inside his body over days, turning him into a living bomb. When he entered the hangar for his shift, the devices detonated. Bomani was vaporized. Everyone within the blast radius died with him. Anakin and Ahsoka led the investigation. They traced the nanodroids to Turman and arrested her. She was imprisoned in a Republic military detention facility to await trial. The case appeared closed. Then, Ahsoka visited Turman in her cell. Turman was frightened. She told Ahsoka that she had not acted alone. A Jedi had put her up to it. She was about to name the Jedi who had masterminded the bombing when her throat closed. Turman choked, gasped, and collapsed. She was dead before Ahsoka could reach her. The security footage showed Ahsoka standing in the cell with her hand extended while Turman collapsed. The recording had no audio. From every visual angle, it appeared that Ahsoka Tano had force-choked a prisoner. Barazafi had ended Turman's life remotely through the Force from elsewhere in the facility. She had timed the act to coincide with Ahsoka's visit and ensured that the only person visible on camera when Turman fell was the Padawan the Order would least suspect. Commander Fox arrived with a squad of shock troopers and arrested Ahsoka for murder. She was placed in a high-security cell. The evidence against her was immediate and damning. She had been alone with the victim. The victim was dead, and the security footage showed no one else in the room. Ahsoka escaped Republic custody. The escape itself added to the case against her. Clone troopers were found fallen along her route out of the facility, and their deaths were attributed to Ahsoka. Barriss had struck them down and staged the bodies to match the escape path, layering additional evidence onto a frame that was already suffocating. Ahsoka fled into Coruscant's underworld. She was a fugitive on the planet she had spent years defending. Clone troopers who had fought beside her during the war hunted her through the lower levels. She moved through industrial districts and transit corridors where the Republic's authority thinned and the population's distrust of the Jedi ran deep. The people she passed in the underworld did not see a wrongly accused Padawan. They saw a Jedi running from the law, and most of them assumed she was guilty because most of them had already decided the Jedi were capable of anything. Barriss continued to tighten the frame. She planted a trail of evidence leading to a warehouse on level 1315 of the underworld. Inside the warehouse, crates of nanodroids identical to the ones used in the temple bombing were stacked alongside shipping manifests that could be traced to Ahsoka's access codes. Barriss then went to the warehouse herself, wearing Asajj Ventress's stolen mask and wielding Ventress's red lightsabers. When Ahsoka arrived, following the trail Barriss had laid, the disguised Jedi attacked her. The fight was vicious. Ahsoka defended herself against an opponent she believed was Ventress, while clone troopers closed in from the surrounding corridors. Barriss escaped before Ahsoka could unmask her. The clones arrived to find Ahsoka standing alone in a warehouse full of bomb components. Ahsoka was framed, hunted, and surrounded by evidence manufactured by the one person she would never have suspected. The Jedi Council chose the Republic over their own Padawan. Ahsoka encountered Ventress in the underworld. The two women had fought each other across multiple battlefields during the war. Now, they were both fugitives, both framed, and both operating in territory where neither had allies. Ventress's lightsabers had been stolen and used to implicate both of them. The former enemies cooperated briefly before Ahsoka was captured by clone troopers and returned to Republic custody. The Jedi Council convened to determine Ahsoka's fate. Evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the fallen troopers, the nanodroid crates, and Ahsoka's own flight from custody all pointed to a single conclusion. Admiral Tarkin and the Republic military demanded jurisdiction. A Jedi accused of bombing the Jedi Temple and taking the lives of Republic personnel would be tried by a Republic military tribunal, not by the Order. The Council voted to expel Ahsoka Tano from the Jedi Order. The vote was not unanimous. Obi-Wan argued that the Council should stand with Ahsoka and conduct its own investigation before surrendering her to a military court. He was overruled. Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Saesee Tiin argued that the evidence left no alternative. The Republic's faith in the Jedi was already damaged by the bombing itself. Protecting a suspect the evidence condemned would have destroyed whatever credibility the Order still possessed. Fear had overridden principle, and the Council justified the decision as necessity. Ahsoka was stripped of her Padawan braid, her rank, and her standing within the Order. She was turned over to the Republic for trial. The tribunal was held at the Republic Center for Military Operations. Admiral Tarkin prosecuted. Padme Amidala defended. Chancellor Palpatine presided. A military officer prosecuting a former Jedi in front of the Senate, overseen by the Chancellor, was not the Jedi Order's justice system. It was the Empire's justice system, rehearsed in miniature before the Empire existed. The framework that would govern the galaxy after Order 66 was already being tested on the Padawan, who would serve the Republic more faithfully than most of the senators watching from their pods. Tarkin presented the evidence methodically: the security footage, the dead troopers, the warehouse, the flight, each piece built on the last. Padme challenged the chain of custody and the absence of motive, but the physical evidence was difficult to counter because it had been engineered specifically to resist scrutiny. Barriss had built a frame with the precision of someone who understood exactly how the Republic's legal system evaluated guilt. For Palpatine, the trial's outcome mattered less than its precedent. The Republic had demonstrated its willingness to subordinate Jedi justice to military authority. That precedent was exactly the framework the Empire would need. The Republic put Ahsoka Tano on trial at a military tribunal with Tarkin prosecuting and Palpatine presiding. The military tribunal that would define Imperial justice was being tested on a 16-year-old Padawan who had committed no crime. Anakin refused to accept the verdict the evidence demanded. While the trial proceeded, he continued investigating. Anakin tracked inconsistencies in the nanodroid supply chain. He re-examined the warehouse on level 1315 and found traces that the evidence had been placed rather than accumulated. Ventress's movements confirmed that her lightsabers had been stolen, not lent. Every thread he pulled led away from Ahsoka and towards someone inside the Order. The threads converged on Barriss Offee. Anakin confronted Barriss at the Jedi Temple. He grabbed her lightsaber from her belt and ignited it. Barriss did not attempt to explain or deny. She reached out through the Force and summoned Ventress's red lightsabers from where she had hidden them inside the temple. The moment the crimson blades ignited in her hands, the truth was visible to everyone in the room. Barriss had possessed Ventress's weapons all along. She was the bomber. She was the killer. She was the architect of every piece of evidence that had been used to destroy Ahsoka's life. Anakin and Barriss fought through the temple hallways and courtyard. Barriss was a skilled combatant. She had trained alongside Ahsoka, studied the same forms, and practiced in the same training halls. But Anakin was fighting with the accumulated fury of watching his Padawan hunted, expelled, and put on trial for a crime she did not commit. He wielded both his own lightsaber and Barriss's stolen weapon simultaneously. The duel moved from corridor to courtyard to the temple's lower levels before Anakin overpowered her and brought her down. He dragged Barriss in restraints to the Senate tribunal. The trial stopped. Barriss stood before the chamber and delivered a confession that silenced every senator in attendance. She told the tribunal that the Jedi Order had lost its way. The Order had become an army fighting for the dark side, consumed by the very conflict it claimed to oppose. The Jedi had abandoned their principles, embraced military command, and allowed themselves to be used as instruments of a war that was destroying the galaxy. Barriss had bombed the temple because she believed the Order needed to be confronted with the consequences of what it had become. She had framed Ahsoka because Ahsoka's loyalty to the Order made her the perfect scapegoat, someone the Council would believe was guilty because believing otherwise would require the Council to question its own judgment. The confession was devastating because it contained truth. The Jedi had become generals. They had compromised their principles repeatedly throughout the war. They had authorized assassinations, suppressed investigations, deceived their own members, and commanded an army of men who had never been given a choice. Barris's diagnosis was accurate. Her prescription was monstrous. She had taken innocent lives to make a point about innocence. She had destroyed Ahsoka's life to prove that the Order destroyed lives. The contradiction did not diminish the force of her accusation. It amplified it. The war had produced a Jedi who bombed her own temple, and a council that expelled the wrong person for it. Both outcomes grew from the same institutional rot. Ahsoka was acquitted. The charges were dropped. The council summoned her to the temple and offered reinstatement. They told her that the ordeal had been her great trial, the kind of test that proved a Padawan was ready for knighthood. They framed her suffering as a gift. Ahsoka refused. She stood in the council chamber and looked at the masters who had expelled her. She looked at the seats where Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Teen had voted to cast her out. She looked at Obi-Wan, who had argued on her behalf and lost. She looked at Yoda, who had presided over the vote and allowed it to proceed. Then she walked down the temple steps and did not look back. Anakin followed her. He stood on the steps behind her and told her that he understood. Ahsoka's response was quiet and final. She told him that she knew he believed in her, and she was grateful, but this was not about him. She could not stay. She walked away from the Jedi Order, down the steps, alone. Ahsoka walked down the temple steps and did not look back. The Jedi Order had removed the one person who might have kept Anakin Skywalker from kneeling before Palpatine. Ahsoka's departure shattered Anakin in ways the Council never fully understood. The Order had betrayed his Padawan. The system he had served for over a decade had treated Ahsoka as disposable the moment the evidence turned against her. The Council had not stood with her. It had calculated the political cost of defending her and decided she was not worth the expense. The same institution that had lied to Anakin about Obi-Wan's death, that had faked a funeral to maintain an intelligence operation, that had sent him into a war without ever telling him why the clone army existed, had now thrown away the person he cared about the most. His loyalty was no longer being returned. Barriss was right about the Order losing its way. She was wrong about everything else. But for Anakin, the distinction between Barriss's truth and Barriss's crime was less important than what the entire crisis had revealed about the Council's priorities. They had chosen the Republic's opinion over their own Padawan's innocence. When Palpatine told Anakin that the Jedi did not trust him, that the Council feared his power and resented his independence, the temple bombing would be one of the memories that made those words ring true. Ahsoka's absence left a hole in Anakin's life that no one else could fill. She had been his student, his partner, his responsibility, and his anger. Ahsoka had challenged him when he went too far. She had reminded him what the Jedi were supposed to be by embodying it more naturally than he ever could. Without her, the path between Anakin and Palpatine had one fewer obstacle. This fracture would not heal. The Order did not understand what it had lost. It recorded Ahsoka's departure as a personal choice, a Padawan who was not ready for the burden of knighthood. It did not recognize that Ahsoka had left because she was ready, and because what she was ready for was no longer something the Jedi Order could provide. On Ringo Vinda, a clone trooper's weapon discharged into a Jedi general's back. The shot was involuntary, but the chip that caused it was not. Chapter 6: The Buried Truth. During a routine engagement on Ringo Vinda's orbital station, Clone Trooper Tub walked away from his squad, approached Jedi General Tiplar from behind, raised his blaster, and shot her in the back. He was in a trance state, his eyes open but vacant. He had no memory of doing it. He repeated a phrase that sounded like a mission designation, but matched nothing in the Republic's operational database. Something inside the system had fired ahead of schedule. The Republic's most dangerous secrets were not hidden by the enemy. They were hidden by the Republic itself. 3 investigations during the war's final phase uncovered truths that could have prevented the catastrophe waiting at the end of the Clone Wars. A clone trooper discovered the kill switch buried inside every soldier's brain. A financial crisis handed the Chancellor direct control of the galaxy's banking system, and the Jedi Council learned that the clone army had been commissioned by a man the Sith had murdered before the war began. All 3 discoveries were suppressed. The kill switch stayed active, the bank stayed captured, the army stayed in service, and every institution that received the evidence decided independently, and for different reasons, that acting on the truth was more dangerous than ignoring it. The conspiracy was not hidden in one place. It was distributed across the Republic itself. Tup had served without incident through years of combat. He was a reliable soldier, a veteran of Umbara who would stun Pong Krell from behind when no one else could get close enough. Nothing in his record suggested instability. Nothing in his behavior before the battle indicated that anything was wrong. Tiplar was dead before anyone around her understood what had happened. Her twin sister, Jedi General Tip Lee, watched from across the corridor. Tup was restrained, evacuated. The official assumption was psychological breakdown, a combat stress reaction triggered by the sustained intensity of the Ring of Vinda campaign. ARC Trooper Fives refused to accept that explanation. He had served alongside Tup in the 501st through multiple campaigns. Tup was not unstable. Something had been done to him. Fives accompanied Tup to Kamino, where Kaminoan medical staff examined the clone under the supervision of Jedi Master Shaak Ti. The Kaminoan chief medical scientist Nala Se directed the examination. She was thorough, professional, and operating under a directive that Fives did not know existed. Nala Se was aware of the inhibitor chips. She knew what they were designed to do. Her instructions were to contain the malfunction, preserve the secrecy of the program, and prevent anyone from discovering the chip's true purpose. Fives did not cooperate with containment. Working with the medical droid AZ-3, he performed an unauthorized scan of Tup's brain and identified an organic chip embedded deep in the neural tissue. The chip was not a standard piece of Kaminoan cloning infrastructure. It was a behavioral modification biochip implanted during the embryonic stage of every clone's development. Fives extracted the chip from Tup's brain. Tup died shortly afterward, his body unable to sustain the damage the malfunctioning chip had caused. Fives then did something no clone had ever done before. He had his own chip removed. With the chip extracted and in his possession, Fives analyzed its structure with AZ-3's help. The chip was not a safeguard against rogue behavior, which was the cover story the Kaminoans had used to justify its existence. It was a command override. When activated by an external signal, the chip would suppress the clone's individual will and compel absolute obedience to a single directive. The chip inside Tup had activated prematurely. Whatever order it was designed to execute had fired before the signal was sent. Fives had discovered Order 66 before it existed. One clone had come closer to unraveling Palpatine's entire design than the Jedi Council, the Senate, or any intelligence agency in the Republic. Fives found the kill switch inside every clone soldier in the Republic's army. He traced the conspiracy to the highest level of the Republic's government. Shaak Ti arranged for Fives to present his findings directly to Chancellor Palpatine on Coruscant. The meeting took place at the Grand Republic Medical Facility. Shaak Ti and Nala Se accompanied Fives, but were dismissed by the Chancellor, who insisted on speaking with the clone trooper privately. Palpatine listened to Fives' evidence. He examined the chip. He asked questions that demonstrated a detailed understanding of the program's architecture. Then, he revealed the truth. Palpatine told Fives exactly what the chips were for. The conversation happened behind closed doors, with no witnesses. What Fives learned in that room was enough to destroy everything he had ever believed about the Republic, the war, and the army he served. When the doors opened, Palpatine had already reframed the narrative. He told the guards that Fives had attacked him. The clone trooper who had entered the Chancellor's office carrying evidence of a galactic conspiracy left it as a suspect in an assassination attempt. Nala Se had taken additional precautions. During the shuttle flight to Coruscant, she'd secretly injected Fives with a compound that degraded his cognitive function. The drug made him paranoid, aggressive, and unable to articulate his thoughts coherently. The man who had extracted the most dangerous secret in the Republic was now chemically incapable of explaining what he had found. Fives fled the medical facility and contacted Rex and Anakin. He arranged a meeting at a warehouse on level 1325 of the Coruscant underworld. When they arrived, Fives was erratic, sweating, and barely able to form complete sentences. He trapped Anakin and Rex inside a ray shield to prevent them from leaving before he could finish explaining. He told them about the chips. He told them what the chips were designed to do. He told them the conspiracy went to the top. Rex listened. Anakin listened. Neither fully understood what Fives was telling them because the drugs in his system had turned his testimony into fragments. He sounded delusional. He sounded like a man who had cracked under pressure and constructed a paranoid fantasy to explain his friend's death. Commander Fox arrived with a squad of Coruscant Guard shock troopers. Fox ordered Fives to surrender. Fives, his judgment destroyed by the compound in his bloodstream, reached for Rex's blaster. Fox fired immediately. Fives collapsed. Rex caught him. The ARC trooper who had survived the Citadel, defended Kamino, fought through Umbara, and uncovered the most dangerous secret in the Republic, was dying on a warehouse floor. His last words were broken and quiet. He told Rex that the nightmares were finally over. Rex held him until he stopped breathing. Fives was drugged, discredited, and silenced. Rex held him as he fell and never forgot what Fives tried to say. Palpatine's cover-up was swift and total. He attributed Tup's malfunction to a parasite native to Ringo Vinda that had degraded the clone's inhibitor chip, causing aberrant behavior. The official report classified Fives' actions as a paranoid episode triggered by the same parasite. The Jedi Council accepted the explanation. Shaak-Ti accepted the explanation. The investigation was closed. The system had absorbed the threat and sealed itself shut. Rex did not accept it. He did not file a contradictory report or challenge the official findings. He simply remembered. He remembered Fives' name. He remembered what Fives tried to tell him in the warehouse. He remembered the word chips. That memory, carried in silence through every remaining battle of the Clone Wars, would become the reason Rex survived Order 66 when every other clone in the galaxy obeyed it without hesitation. While Fives' discovery was being buried, Palpatine was completing his capture of the Republic's financial infrastructure. The instrument was Rush Clovis, a former banking clan senator and Padme Amidala's former romantic interest. Clovis had resurfaced with evidence of massive corruption inside the intergalactic banking clan. He proposed reforms that would restore transparency and accountability to the institution that controlled the galaxy's credit supply. Anakin's jealousy over Padme's involvement with Clovis triggered a dark side outburst that horrified everyone who witnessed it. Anakin confronted Clovis at Padme's apartment and beat him with his fists while Padme watched. The attack was not a calculated intimidation tactic. It was rage, pure and uncontrolled, directed at a man whose proximity to Padme activated every possessive instinct Anakin carried. Padme was not frightened of Clovis. She was frightened of Anakin. The man she had married in secret had just demonstrated that his love operated on a frequency indistinguishable from violence. The darkness Palpatine had watched Anakin display on Naboo was no longer situational. It was becoming permanent. Palpatine manipulated the entire crisis from behind the scenes. He encouraged Clovis's reforms while simultaneously engineering a separatist invasion of Scipio, the banking clan's headquarters world. The invasion created a crisis that only Republic military intervention could resolve. Clovis sacrificed himself during the fighting, releasing Anakin's grip and falling to ensure Padme's survival. The banking clan's leadership was eliminated. The Republic assumed direct control of the banks. Each crisis Palpatine manufactured produced the exact institutional dependency he required. Palpatine now controlled the military, the Senate, and the financial system. Every pillar of Republic governance answered to the Chancellor. The institutions still existed. They still held votes and issued reports and maintained the appearance of democratic function. But the man sitting at the center of every institution was the same man, and no one with the authority to challenge him had the evidence or the will to do so. Palpatine seized the banks by engineering the crisis that destroyed them. The Republic's institutions still functioned, but they no longer functioned independently. The final investigation of the period struck closest to the clone army's origin. Jedi Master Plo Koon discovered the wreckage of a T-6 shuttle on the moon of Obadiah. Inside the wreckage, he found a lightsaber. It belonged to Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, a member of the Jedi Council who had been lost over a decade earlier under circumstances the Order had never fully investigated. Sifo Dyas had commissioned the clone army on Kamino. The Jedi had known this since Obi-Wan's discovery during the lead-up to the Battle of Geonosis. What they had never determined was why Sifo Dyas had placed the Order, who had funded it, and how a single Jedi acting without Council authorization had arranged the production of millions of soldiers. The answers had been buried for over a decade. They were about to surface at the worst possible moment. The investigation on Obadiah provided answers the Council was not prepared to receive. Former Chancellor Valorum had secretly sent Sifo-Dyas, accompanied by his aide Silman, to negotiate with the Pike Syndicate. The Jedi Council had simultaneously diverted Sifo-Dyas to Felucia for a tribal conflict, creating a gap in oversight that left him exposed. A man identified as Tyrannus had paid the Pikes to shoot down Sifo-Dyas' shuttle, ending the Jedi Master's life. The Pikes had kept Silman alive as leverage for over a decade. Anakin and Obi-Wan traveled to Obadiah and confronted the Pike leadership. They found Silman alive, but psychologically shattered by years of imprisonment. Before Silman could reveal Tyrannus' identity, Count Dooku arrived and ended him through the Force. Lone Pike inadvertently identified Dooku as Tyrannus by addressing him by the only name the Pikes knew. Dooku claimed Sifo-Dyas had cooperated willingly with the Clone Army's creation. A lightsaber duel followed. Dooku escaped. The Jedi Council now possessed a devastating piece of information. The Clone Army that the Republic depended on for its survival had been commissioned by a Jedi who was eliminated by the Sith. The man responsible was the leader of the Separatist military. The army the Jedi commanded every day had been designed, from its inception, by the enemy. The Council chose silence. Revealing the Clone Army's Sith origins would have undermined public confidence in the war effort, destabilized the military's chain of command, and raised questions about the Jedi's judgment that the Order could not afford to answer while the war was still being fought. The information was filed. No action was taken. The army remained in service. The Council had now suppressed evidence about the very weapon that would be used to destroy them. 3 investigations, 3 truths. Fives found the kill switch and was silenced for it. Clovis found the financial corruption and fell in the crisis. Palpatine manufactured around it. The Council found the Clone Army's Sith origins and chose to bury the finding rather than confront what it meant. The Republic did not fall because information was unavailable. It fell because every institution that received the truth decided the truth was too dangerous to act on. The chip stayed active. The bank stayed captured. The army stayed loyal to a chain of command that terminated at the desk of a Sith Lord, and the clock continued running towards an order that no one with the power to stop it believed was coming. The Jedi discovered that the Clone Army was commissioned by a man the Sith had eliminated, and yet they chose silence. While they suppressed the truth about their army, Yoda heard a voice from beyond death. Chapter 7: Before the End. During meditation in his quarters at the Jedi Temple, Yoda heard someone speaking to him through the Force. The voice belonged to a man who had been dead for over a decade. Qui-Gon Jinn, the Jedi Master struck down by Darth Maul on Naboo, had discovered a path that no Jedi in recorded history had walked. He had found a way to preserve his consciousness within the cosmic force rather than dissolving into it. He was reaching out to the one Jedi he believed was capable of learning the same technique. The Clone Wars' final months did not produce a decisive battle or a turning point that historians could identify as the moment the Republic's fate was sealed. That moment had already passed. The kill switch was buried. The institutions were captured. The Padawan who might have saved the Chosen One had walked away. What the final months produced instead were acts of preparation. People who sensed the end was coming made their choices about what to preserve, what to destroy, and what to sacrifice before the darkness arrived. Yoda was the first to act, and the nature of his action revealed how completely the Jedi Order's leadership understood, on some level, that the war could not be won. The Council's reaction was alarm rather than curiosity. When Yoda reported the voice, Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi suspected Sith manipulation. The dark side had grown so powerful during the war that a Force illusion designed to destabilize the Order's most senior member was entirely plausible. Yoda underwent medical examination. Anakin and Obi-Wan were assigned to observe him. No physical or psychological cause was identified. The Council remained skeptical. Yoda did not. He escaped Coruscant in secret, flying alone to Dagobah. Dagobah was a swamp world teeming with life and saturated with the Force. It was remote, uncharted on most navigational databases, and untouched by the war. The planet's dense concentration of living organisms created a natural amplifier for the Force that drowned out the dark side interference radiating from Coruscant. On Dagobah, Qui-Gon's presence became clearer. The dead Jedi could not fully manifest visually, but his voice guided Yoda to the next stage of the journey, a planet at the heart of the galaxy where the cosmic force originated. Yoda traveled there alone. The planet had no name in any archive. Its surface was divided into territories governed by the 5 priestesses, luminous beings who embodied different aspects of the living force. They were ancient, predating the Jedi Order by millennia, and they controlled access to the technique Qui-Gon had discovered. They agreed to test Yoda. If he passed, he would learn how to preserve his identity after death. If he failed, the knowledge would remain sealed. The trials were designed to break him. The first trial forced Yoda to confront his own dark side. A shadow version of himself materialized, embodying every emotion Yoda had spent nearly 9 centuries suppressing. Fear, anger, pride, jealousy, and the desperate need to confront outcomes that the Force had already decided. The Shadow Yoda was small and vicious, and entirely honest about the parts of himself that the real Yoda preferred to keep buried beneath serenity. Yoda did not need to defeat a shadow through combat or denial. He accepted it. He acknowledged that the darkness was part of him, that it had always been part of him, and that pretending otherwise was itself a form of dishonesty the Force would not tolerate. The shadow dissolved, and the trial was passed. The war had taught the Jedi to suppress doubt. The Force required Yoda to embrace it. The priestesses sent Yoda to Moraband, the ancient Sith home world. The planet's surface was a wasteland of crumbling temples and tombs, saturated with dark side energy accumulated over thousands of years. Inside the Valley of the Dark Lords, Yoda encountered a vision of Darth Bane, the Sith Lord who had created the Rule of Two over a millennium earlier. The vision attempted to frighten Yoda into submission. Yoda recognized it as an illusion and dismissed it. The final test was more dangerous. Darth Sidious and Count Dooku, sensing Yoda's presence on Moraband through the Force, launched a combined assault. They created a massive Force illusion designed to trap Yoda in a false reality where the Sith had won, the Jedi were destroyed, and Yoda himself was offered the chance to prevent the catastrophe by sacrificing Anakin Skywalker. The illusion was sophisticated enough to feel real. The temptation was genuine. Saving the galaxy by sacrificing one man was the kind of calculation the Jedi Council had been making throughout the entire war. Yoda refused. He recognized the trap. The willingness to sacrifice an individual for the greater good was precisely the kind of thinking that had led the Order to its current state. He rejected the illusion and endured the psychic assault until Sidious and Dooku exhausted themselves maintaining it. Yoda passed the trials. The priestesses began teaching him the path to consciousness preservation after death. The technique would eventually allow Yoda to appear as a Force ghost, guiding future generations of Jedi long after his physical body ceased to exist. Yoda learned how to survive death, but could not learn how to prevent it. The Grand Master was not preparing to win the war, but to outlast its consequences. The significance of Yoda's journey was not what he gained. It was what his decision to undertake it revealed about the Order's unconscious awareness of its own trajectory. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order, the most experienced Force user alive, had chosen to spend the war's final weeks learning how to persist after death, rather than pursuing any strategy that might prevent the deaths from occurring. On some level beneath conscious analysis, Yoda already knew the Order was not going to survive. The question was whether anything could be preserved from the wreckage. While Yoda prepared for the spiritual aftermath of the Jedi's destruction, the physical aftermath of Maul's defeat on Mandalore was still unfolding. Sidious had imprisoned Maul after breaking him in the Sundari throne room. The imprisonment was not permanent. It was bait. Sidious revealed his true plan to Dooku. Maul was being used to draw Mother Talzin out of hiding. Talzin was the last surviving Night Sister with the power to challenge the Sith through magic, and Sidious wanted her eliminated before his endgame began. Death Watch loyalists Rakast and Gar Saxon broke Maul out of captivity. Maul reassembled what remained of the Shadow Collective and launched a series of engagements against Separatist forces. Battles erupted on Zanbar, where Grievous crushed Maul's Mandalorian forces, and on Ord Mantell, where Maul's criminal allies and Dooku's droid army fought to a standstill. Each engagement was designed by Sidious to push Maul towards Dathomir, where Talzin would be forced to intervene directly. The trap worked. On Dathomir, Talzin manifested physically for the first time since the Night Sister massacre. She attempted to drain Dooku's life force through Night Sister magic, intending to restore herself permanently by consuming the Sith Lord's strength. Sidious and Grievous intervened before the ritual could be completed. Grievous drove 2 lightsabers through Talzin. She fell on the planet where she had ruled for generations. Talzin's sacrifice was deliberate. She could have fled. She chose instead to hold Dooku in place long enough for Maul to escape, spending her life to preserve her sons. With Talzin gone, the Night Sister tradition was truly extinct. Dathomir's dark side legacy, the only Force tradition that had operated outside the Sith's control for centuries, was erased. The Shadow Collective's non-Mandalorian members abandoned Maul. He retained only a fragment of Death Watch loyalists and a rage that no longer had an infrastructure to support it. Talzin died so Maul could live. The only Force users left in the galaxy were Jedi and Sith, and the Sith had already won. The Jedi Council's deepest moral compromise of the war produced one final act of sacrifice that redeemed no one and saved nothing except a single man's soul. The Council authorized the assassination of Count Dooku. The trigger was the atrocity on Marani, where Dooku ordered the annihilation of an entire species. The scale of the atrocity pushed the Council past a threshold they had spent 3 years approaching. The decision represented the abandonment of every principle the Order claimed to uphold. Jedi did not carry out targeted eliminations. Jedi did not select individuals for premeditated removal, regardless of the threat they posed. The Council had debated, rationalized, and ultimately approved a mission that the Jedi of a generation earlier would have rejected without discussion. The war had eroded the boundary between defense and aggression so completely that the Order's leadership could no longer tell the difference. Each compromise the Jedi had made during the war had led to this one, and this one could not be walked back. Quinlan Vos was selected for the mission. He was a Jedi with a history of deep cover operations and an affinity for the shadows that made other Council members uncomfortable. His handler and partner was Asajj Ventress. The Council reasoned that Ventress's intimate knowledge of Dooku's defenses, combined with her personal hatred of the Count, made her the ideal asset. Ventress trained Vos in Night Sister combat techniques, which required touching the dark side to master. They fought together, planned together, they fell in love. Their first attempt failed. Dooku captured Vos and subjected him to psychological torment designed to turn him. The method was precise. Dooku told Vos that Ventress had taken the life of his own Jedi Master during the war's early campaigns. The revelation shattered Vos's trust in the woman he loved and gave Dooku the emotional leverage to pull him towards the dark side. Vos fell. He became Dooku's apprentice. The Jedi's own operative had been captured and turned against them. Ventress refused to abandon him. She mounted a rescue that became a final confrontation. In the climactic battle, Dooku unleashed Force lightning at Vos. Ventress stepped between them and absorbed the full blast. The lightning took her life. Her sacrifice snapped Vos back to the light. The dark side's grip broke because the woman who had been used as a weapon by every master she had ever served chose, for the first and last time, to die on her own terms. Obi-Wan and Vos returned Ventress's body to Dathomir. They laid her in the planet's sacred waters, among the ruins of the civilization that had created her. The woman the Jedi had hunted for years, the apprentice Dooku had discarded, the Night Sister who had lost everything, was carried home by the people who had once considered her an enemy. The Jedi had authorized a targeted elimination. Their weapon was a knight trained in the dark side by a woman the galaxy had abused since childhood. Ventress fell, saving the man who loved her. The order that sent Vos on the mission recorded his return and Ventress's loss and moved on to the next crisis. No institutional reckoning followed. The program was quietly shelved. The moral cost was absorbed without acknowledgement. The war had normalized the unthinkable so thoroughly that the Jedi could authorize an elimination, lose their operative to the dark side, watch a woman sacrifice herself to undo the damage, and file it all under operational lessons learned. The war's final weeks also produced two operations that bridged the gap between the Clone Wars and the era that would follow. On Skako Minor, Anakin, Rex, and Clone Force 99 rescued Echo from the Techno Union. Echo had been presumed dead since the Citadel mission during Year 2. He was alive, but barely. The Techno Union had wired him into their computer systems on Skako Minor, using his strategic knowledge as a living algorithm that predicted Republic battle tactics. His body had also been extensively modified with cybernetic implants. Tubes fed into his torso. His limbs had been replaced with prosthetics, including a scomp-link arm. He was emaciated and disoriented when the rescue team found him. Like the Zygerrian slaves and the Kadavo prisoners before him, Echo had been reduced to a resource. Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch, were enhanced clones with genetic mutations that gave each member a specialized ability. Hunter possessed heightened sensory perception. Wrecker had extraordinary physical strength. Crosshair was an exceptional marksman, and Tech operated with accelerated cognitive processing. They fought alongside Rex and Anakin through the Techno Union's facility on Skako Minor, cutting through droid defenses while Echo fed them counter strategies from inside the system he had been enslaved to. Echo was freed. After the Republic secured victory at the Battle of Anaxes using the intelligence Echo provided, Hunter invited Echo to join Clone Force 99. Rex, though saddened to lose another brother, supported the decision. Echo accepted and became the squad's fifth member. The clone, who had been a prisoner of war, a living computer, and a ghost in the 501st records, departed with a new unit. Rex saluted him as he left. On Coruscant's lower levels, Ahsoka Tano was living under a false identity. She befriended Trace and Rafa Martez, two sisters whose parents had been lost when a Jedi diverted a crashing transport away from a crowded platform and into their home. The Jedi had chosen to save the people on the platform. The Martez family paid the cost. Afterward, a Jedi came to the sisters and told them that the Force would be with them. No compensation, no accountability, just a platitude delivered to two orphans standing in the wreckage of their home. Ahsoka saw the Order through civilian eyes for the first time. The institution she had served with absolute commitment had caused harm and never bothered to register. The Martez sisters did not hate the Jedi because of propaganda. They hated the Jedi because a Jedi had taken their parents away from them, offered a sentence of spiritual comfort, and walked away. The experience completed a transformation that Ahsoka's departure from the Order had begun. She was no longer a Jedi who had left. She was something new, someone who carried the Jedi's training without their institutional blindness. When Bo-Katan Kryze contacted her with intelligence that Maul had returned to Mandalore, Ahsoka had a reason to fight again. Not for the Order, not for the Republic, but for the people the war had failed. The war's final battle was about to begin, and it would be fought by a woman the Jedi had expelled and a clone army wearing her face. Maul was on Mandalore. The last battle of the Clone Wars was about to begin. Chapter 8: The Siege of Mandalore. The Clone Wars began with a battle on Geonosis and ended with a siege on Mandalore. The first battle was fought by an army no one had ordered, commanded by Jedi who had never been soldiers, against a separatist movement that was secretly controlled by the same man who had created the army. The last battle was fought by a company of clones wearing their commander's face on their helmets, led by a woman who was no longer a Jedi, against a former Sith Lord who was the only person in the galaxy willing to tell the truth about what was coming. Between those two battles, every institution the Republic depended on was hollowed from the inside. The Siege of Mandalore was the moment the hollowing became visible. It was also the last moment anyone could have stopped it. Several moments during the siege came within reach of altering the future. None of them held. The siege began with a reunion. Anakin and Obi-Wan were fighting the Battle of Umbara during the Outer Rim sieges when Ahsoka Tano and Bo-Katan Kryze arrived aboard a Mandalorian transport. Bo-Katan brought intelligence that Maul had returned to Mandalore and was consolidating power among the remnants of his Death Watch loyalists. She requested Republic military support to retake the planet. Ahsoka delivered the request personally because Bo-Katan, a Mandalorian nationalist who had fought against Republic intervention for years, needed a credible intermediary. Anakin saw Ahsoka for the first time since she had walked down the temple steps. The distance between them had not diminished what they had meant to each other. It had calcified around the wound. They spoke carefully, navigating the space between what they wanted to say and what the moment allowed. Anakin had prepared something for her. He returned her lightsabers, modified with the crystals retuned to produce blue blades, in place of the green she had carried before the Council expelled her. The weapons were a gift and an apology, and an admission that he had never stopped thinking of her as his Padawan, regardless of what the Council had decided. Ahsoka ignited the blades, and the blue light reflected off armor that had been painted for her. The 332nd had prepared something as well. When Rex brought Ahsoka to the hangar to review her troops, the clones removed their helmets and revealed that they had painted their armor with Ahsoka's Togruta facial markings. The orange and white patterns covered every helmet in the company. The gesture was not authorized by command. It was not regulation. It was the 332nd telling Ahsoka that the Council's decision did not speak for them. These men had fought beside her on Christophsis, on Geonosis, on Umbara, and on dozens of worlds between. They had watched the Order expel her, and they had disagreed in the only way soldiers could, by wearing their loyalty on their armor where everyone could see it. She was moved in a way that she did not allow herself to fully express, because expressing it would have meant acknowledging how much the departure had cost her. Then, everything changed. A priority transmission arrived from Coruscant. General Grievous had attacked the capital and kidnapped Chancellor Palpatine. The opening act of Revenge of the Sith had begun. Anakin and Obi-Wan were recalled immediately. The Republic's two most capable Jedi generals were needed to rescue the Chancellor, and no other assignment could take priority. Anakin assigned Rex command of a division within the 501st, designated the 332nd, and prompted him to commander for the Mandalore operation. The division was practical. It was also symbolic. Anakin was entrusting his men and his former Padawan to each other because he could not be in both places at once. His farewell to Ahsoka was brief. They exchanged a simple acknowledgement and parted. It was the last time Ahsoka saw Anakin Skywalker. The next time she would sense his presence through the Force, he would no longer be Anakin. As the Mandalore siege force departed, Anakin and Obi-Wan flew into the Battle of Coruscant above the capital. The two timelines, the animated series and Revenge of the Sith, were now running simultaneously. The 332nd painted their helmets with Ahsoka's face, and then Grievous attacked Coruscant and pulled Anakin away. The last time Ahsoka saw Anakin Skywalker, they said goodbye over a battlefield neither of them would survive unchanged. The siege of Sundari began with a combined assault. Bo-Katan's Night Owls and Ahsoka's 332nd descended on Mandalore's capital through atmosphere choked with anti-aircraft fire. The Mandalorian loyalists used jetpacks to engage Death Watch remnants in aerial combat above the city's dome structures, trading blaster fire across vertical distances that clone troopers could not cover from the ground. Bo-Katan led the aerial campaign personally, weaving between dome rooftops and firing platforms while directing her warriors against Maul's entrenched defenders. Below, clone troopers of the 332nd fought through the streets and plazas of Sundari, clearing positions building by building in urban warfare that bore no resemblance to the open field engagements the Grand Army had been designed for. Maul's forces were entrenched, but outnumbered. The siege was not designed to be a prolonged campaign. It was designed to corner Maul and force a confrontation. Ahsoka hunted Maul through Sundari's undercity while the surface battle raged above her. The tunnels beneath the capital were dark, industrial, and built for a population that had lived under domed cities for generations. Maul was waiting for her. He had anticipated the siege. He had anticipated Ahsoka. What he had not anticipated was that Anakin would not come with her. The entire siege had been Maul's design. He had allowed intelligence about his return to reach Bo-Katan because he wanted the Republic to send forces to Mandalore. Specifically, he wanted the Republic to send Anakin Skywalker. Maul's plan was to end Anakin on Mandalore, depriving Darth Sidious of his chosen apprentice and disrupting the Sith Master's endgame. The siege was a trap built for one man, and that man was currently fighting above Coruscant instead. The enemy understood Sidious's plan more clearly than anyone in the Jedi Order. While Ahsoka descended into Sundari's tunnels, events above Coruscant were accelerating. Anakin and Obi-Wan boarded Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand, and fought their way to the Chancellor. Anakin confronted Count Dooku aboard the flagship. Palpatine, bound in a chair, watched. Dooku fought both the Jedi, but Anakin overpowered him, severing both his hands. Palpatine told Anakin to end the unarmed prisoner. Anakin hesitated. Then, he crossed his blades and ended Dooku. The Sith apprentice who had started the war was struck down by the man who would finish it. Maul had designed the entire siege to lure Anakin to Mandalore, but Anakin never came. The one strategy that might have disrupted Palpatine's endgame failed because Grievous attacked Coruscant first. Maul confronted Ahsoka in the Undercity and told her everything. Maul laid out everything. Sidious's plan was about to be executed. The Republic and the Jedi would fall. Anakin Skywalker was destined to become Sidious's new apprentice. Maul explained the architecture of the conspiracy with a clarity that no Jedi had achieved because he had been inside the Sith and understood how Sidious operated. The clone army was a weapon aimed at the Jedi. The war was a mechanism designed to deliver emergency powers to the Chancellor. And Anakin Skywalker was the final piece, the apprentice Sidious had been grooming since before the war began. Maul offered Ahsoka an alliance. Together, they could stop Sidious. Together, they could prevent the catastrophe. The offer was genuine. Maul did not care about saving the Republic or the Jedi. He wanted Sidious destroyed for personal reasons that had nothing to do with justice. But the outcome would have been the same. If Ahsoka had accepted, the alliance between a former Padawan and a former Sith might have been enough to change everything. Ahsoka refused the moment Maul named Anakin. She could not accept that her former master would turn. She could not process the claim that the man who had returned her lightsabers hours earlier, who had painted his clones with her face, who had fought beside her through years of war, would kneel before a Sith Lord and help him destroy the Jedi. Ahsoka rejected it because accepting it meant accepting that Anakin was already lost, and she was not capable of making that calculation about someone she loved. Their duel was the finest lightsaber combat the Clone Wars ever produced. The choreography was performed using Ray Park's motion capture, the actor who had played Maul in The Phantom Menace. The fight moved through the tunnels and catwalks of Sundari's Undercity with a ferocity that reflected both combatants' desperation. Maul used the narrow corridors to neutralize Ahsoka's dual blade advantage, forcing the fight into confined spaces where his single saber and superior strength gave him leverage. Ahsoka adapted by using the catwalks and vertical architecture of the Undercity, leaping between platforms and attacking from angles that Maul's aggressive forward style could not easily counter. The duel spilled onto a series of construction beams suspended above a massive drop. Maul fought to escape. Ahsoka fought to capture him and prove that his prophecy about Anakin was wrong. She caught Maul on the beams, used the Force to suspend him above the void, and brought him down. The 332nd secured him in a Mandalorian containment unit aboard a Venator-class cruiser for transport to Coruscant. Maul had told the truth. Ahsoka had refused it. The galaxy would pay for the refusal. But the refusal itself was not a failure of intelligence or courage. It was a failure of imagination. Ahsoka could not imagine a universe in which Anakin Skywalker became the thing that destroyed the Jedi because her experience of Anakin contradicted that possibility. Love made the truth invisible. The same attachment that had made Anakin vulnerable to Palpatine now made Ahsoka unable to see what Anakin was becoming. Aboard the Venator, the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith merged into a single timeline. The series recreated a scene from the film and then extended it. Mace Windu appeared via hologram to brief the Council on Grievous's location. The holographic meeting played identically to the corresponding scene in Revenge of the Sith. Then, the film's scene ended, and the series continued. Ahsoka and Rex walked into the frame after the Council's discussion had concluded. Ahsoka reported Maul's capture. She asked to speak with Anakin. She was told he had been sent to inform the Chancellor that Grievous had been located on Utapau. The timing was devastating in retrospect. At that precise moment, Anakin was with Palpatine. The conversation that would lead to Anakin's turn was either underway or about to begin. Yoda spoke to Ahsoka privately before closing the transmission. He asked if she had a message for Skywalker. The moment hung in the air. Ahsoka knew what Maul had told her. She knew the prophecy about Anakin. She had defeated Maul, but she had not disproved his claims. If she told Yoda what Maul had said, the Council would have received a specific, actionable warning about Anakin's vulnerability to Sidious. They might have recalled him. They might have sent someone to separate him from the Chancellor. They might have acted. The weight of the decision pressed against Ahsoka's chest in the seconds before she spoke. She had spent her entire life trusting Anakin. Warning the Council meant breaking that trust. Staying silent meant gambling the galaxy on the hope that Maul was wrong. Ahsoka paused. She told Yoda she would tell Anakin herself when she saw him. She never saw him again. Yoda asked Ahsoka if she had a message for Anakin, and she said she would deliver it herself. She never saw him again. The Venator carrying Maul jumped to hyperspace en route to Coruscant. Aboard the cruiser, Ahsoka sensed something shifting in the Force. A disturbance was building, deep and vast, like pressure accumulating behind a wall that was about to break. On Coruscant, events collapsed into their final sequence. Obi-Wan traveled to Utapau and defeated General Grievous. Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious to Anakin. Mace Windu led a team of Jedi Masters to arrest the Chancellor. Anakin, torn between his loyalty to the Jedi and his desperate need to save Padme from the death he had foreseen, followed Windu to the Chancellor's office. The Jedi Master and the Sith Lord fought across the office until Windu gained the upper hand and drove Sidious to the window's edge. Windu disarmed Sidious. Anakin severed Windu's hand, and Sidious struck Windu down with Force lightning and hurled him through the window into the Coruscant night. Anakin knelt. He accepted the name Darth Vader. The Chosen One became the instrument of the Jedi's destruction. The Republic fell along the fractures the war had created. Aboard the Venator, Ahsoka felt it. The disturbance she had sensed erupted through the Force like a scream. She did not know what had happened. She only knew that something fundamental had broken. Maul felt it too, confined in his containment unit. His reaction was not surprise, it was recognition. Everything he had warned Ahsoka about was happening. Darth Sidious activated his holographic transmitter and sent a single message to every clone commander in the galaxy. The message was 3 words long: Execute Order 66. On the bridge of the Venator, Commander Rex received the transmission. The hologram of Sidious appeared before him. The order was given. Rex's inhibitor chip activated. Tears ran down his face. His hands trembled, and then he raised his weapon. Rex received the order and tears ran down his face as the chip took hold. The war that began with an army answering one man's command ended the same way. Chapter 9. Order 66. The order reached every clone commander in the galaxy simultaneously. There was no preamble. There was no justification. There was no context provided, and none was required. The inhibitor chips did not need reasons. They needed a signal. Darth Sidious provided it, and the army the Republic had purchased, trained, and trusted with the defense of democratic civilization turned its weapons on the men and women who had led them through 3 years of war. Order 66 was not a battle, it was a mechanism. The Clone Wars had been designed to end this way from the beginning. Every campaign, every liberation, every heroic stand the Republic had celebrated was part of a machine built to produce this single moment. The clones who pulled the triggers were not traitors. They were tools functioning exactly as their manufacturer intended. The Jedi who fell were not casualties of war. They were targets in a purge that had been engineered before the first shot of the Clone Wars was ever fired. On the bridge of the Venator-class cruiser carrying Maul to Coruscant, Commander Rex fought the chip. The hologram of Sidious dissolved. The order was active. Every clone on the ship received it simultaneously. Their training, their conditioning, and the organic technology buried in their brains aligned towards a single objective: kill the Jedi. Rex's hands moved towards his weapons. His body responded to the override the way it had been designed to respond, but Rex's mind resisted. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled against the programming. His voice broke. He managed to speak through the chip's suppression, forcing words past the override in fragments that cost him everything he had. He told Ahsoka to find Fives. He told her to find him. The name was the message. Fives had died trying to warn them about the chips. Rex had carried that warning in silence through every battle since the warehouse on level 1325. Now, in the seconds before the chip took full control, he delivered the only piece of information that could save Ahsoka's life. Then the override completed. Rex raised his weapons and opened fire on the woman whose face was painted on his helmet. Ahsoka did not fight Rex. She deflected his shots and ran, the corridors of the Venator filled with clones converging on her position. Every trooper in the 332nd, the men who had painted their armor with her markings hours earlier, were now hunting her with the focused precision of soldiers executing a lawful order. Their eyes were open, their aim was steady. The men inside the armor were gone. What remained was the chip's directive and the muscle memory of thousands of hours of combat training directed at the person they had honored that morning. Ahsoka reached a communications terminal and accessed the ship's records. She searched for Fives. Rex's message led her to the files documenting the inhibitor chip investigation, the cover-up, and the location of the chips inside every clone's brain. She understood. The clones were not choosing this. They were being controlled. Rex had fought the control long enough to give her the key. She stunned Rex, restrained him, and with the assistance of medical droids removed his inhibitor chip through emergency surgery while clones pounded on the sealed doors of the medical bay. The procedure was rushed and dangerous. Rex flatlined during the operation. The droids revived him. When Rex opened his eyes, the chip's hold was broken. He was himself again. The first thing he saw was Ahsoka standing over him. The first thing he felt was the weight of what the rest of the army was doing at that exact moment across the galaxy. Rex fought the chip because Fives had died trying to warn him. Rex hesitated, and that hesitation saved Ahsoka Tano's life. Ahsoka and Rex were trapped on a Venator full of clones, programmed to end them. They needed a diversion. Ahsoka made a decision that reflected how fundamentally her perspective had shifted since leaving the Order. She released Maul from his containment unit. Maul did not need to be asked twice. He tore through the ship like a weapon without a safety mechanism. Clones who engaged him fell without hesitation or mercy. Maul was not fighting for Ahsoka or against the Empire. He was fighting to survive, and the trail of destruction he carved through the Venator's corridors served Ahsoka's purpose by drawing the majority of the ship's complement away from her and Rex. Maul reached the hyperdrive and destroyed it, wrenching the Venator out of hyperspace above a moon. He then fought his way to the ship's only remaining shuttle and escaped, leaving Ahsoka and Rex behind on a crippled warship falling out of orbit. The Venator began its descent. Gravity took hold. The ship's structure groaned as atmospheric friction heated the hull. Ahsoka and Rex fought through corridors that were tilting, breaking apart, and filling with clones who continued carrying out Order 66 even as the ship disintegrated around them. ARC Trooper Jesse led the charge, the same Jesse who had survived Umbara, who had stood before Krell's firing squad with Fives, who had fought through the entire war as one of the 501st's most decorated soldiers, pressed the attack against Ahsoka and Rex with no recognition of who they were or what they had shared. His chip left no room for the man he had been. Ahsoka refused to harm the clones. She deflected blaster bolts into walls, ceilings, and equipment, and used the Force to push troopers aside rather than strike them down. Rex fired stun rounds. They were fighting to survive without destroying the men who were trying to destroy them. Every clone on the ship was a victim of the same weapon that Fives had discovered and died trying to expose. Ending them would have been easier. Ahsoka chose the harder path because the harder path was the one the Jedi were supposed to walk. In the war's final minutes, a woman the Order had expelled became the only person still honoring what the Order was supposed to stand for. The Venator hit the moon's atmosphere and broke apart. Ahsoka and Rex reached a Y-wing in the hangar bay as the ship's superstructure collapsed around them. They launched through a gap in the disintegrating hull and cleared the wreckage as the Venator plowed into the moon's surface below them. The impact was catastrophic. The cruiser carved a trench across the landscape, shedding hull plating and debris across kilometers of terrain. No one inside survived. Jesse was lost in the crash. every clone of the 332nd perished wearing Ahsoka's face on their helmets. Ahsoka and Rex landed near the crash site and buried the fallen. Graves were dug in the soil of a moon that had no name and would never appear on any official record. Clone helmets were placed on posts above each one, the orange and white markings of the 332nd facing outward. Ahsoka stood among the graves and removed her lightsaber. She placed it on the ground beside the helmets. The weapon Anakin had returned to her hours earlier, the blue blade she had ignited with gratitude and love, was left in the dirt beside the men who had fallen trying to end her. The lightsaber was a severance. Ahsoka was cutting her last tie to her former life and creating the appearance that she had perished in the crash. If the Empire searched the wreckage and found a Jedi weapon among clone graves, they would conclude that the Jedi commander had fallen alongside her troops. Ahsoka Tano would cease to exist in the Empire's records. The woman who walked away from the crash site was no longer a Jedi, no longer a commander, and no longer part of any institution the galaxy recognized. She and Rex disappeared. While the Venator burned on the moon's surface, the galaxy was being remade. On Coruscant, Darth Vader led the 501st Legion into the Jedi Temple, the same unit that had fought under Anakin Skywalker for 3 years, that had liberated Ryloth and defended Kamino and survived Umbara, marched up the temple steps and began eliminating every person inside. Younglings fell in the rooms where they had trained. Padawans were struck down in the archives. Knights and masters who had spent the war defending the Republic were cut down by the soldiers who had served beside them. The temple burned. The smoke was visible from the Senate district. On Kalar, 14-year-old Padawan Caleb Doom was sharing a campfire with his master, Depa Billaba, and the clones of their company. The evening was quiet. Captain Gray received the transmission. He and Captain Styles stood, drew their weapons, and opened fire on the woman who had led them through months of combat. Depa ordered Caleb to run. She ignited her lightsaber and absorbed the blaster fire meant for her Padawan, holding the line long enough for a 14-year-old boy to sprint into the darkness. Caleb Doom survived. He would eventually take the name Kanan Jarrus and become one of the first Jedi to train a new generation during the Age of the Empire. Across the galaxy, the sequence repeated. Aayla Secura was struck down on Felucia by clones she had commanded through years of service. Ki-Adi-Mundi charged into a wall of blaster fire on Megiddo, deflecting bolts until the sheer volume overwhelmed him. Plo Koon, the Jedi who had discovered Ahsoka as a child and brought her to the temple, was brought down above Cato Neimoidia when his wingman fired on his starfighter without warning. The Jedi who had led the Clone Wars fell in it. The soldiers they had trusted with their lives became the instruments of their destruction. The war ended the way it began, with clones following orders they were never designed to question. On Mustafar, Vader carried out Sidious's final order against the Separatist Council. The leaders Sidious had used to start the war were disposed of the moment the war no longer served its purpose. Newt Gunray, Wat Tambor, Poggle the Lesser, and every other Separatist leader who had believed they were partners in Sidious's enterprise fell in a conference room on a volcanic world, struck down by the apprentice they had never known existed. The war's two armies had always served the same master. The only difference was which one he discarded first. The Jedi Temple burned and the Senate applauded. The chips did not require reason, only an order. Obi-Wan dueled Anakin on Mustafar. The fight ended with Anakin burning on the banks of a lava river, his body broken, his limbs severed, his lungs scorched. Palpatine retrieved what remained and rebuilt him. The black armor sealed around a body that would never heal. The respirator activated. Darth Vader drew his first mechanical breath. Padme died giving birth to twins. Luke was taken to Tatooine by Obi-Wan. Leia was taken to Alderaan by Bail Organa. The children of the Chosen One were hidden from the Father, who would spend 2 decades searching for them. Palpatine addressed the Senate. He told them that the Jedi had attempted a coup. He told them that the Republic required reorganization for security and stability. The Senate applauded. The Galactic Republic became the Galactic Empire. Democracy ended with the consent of the people it had been designed to protect. The Clone Wars series concluded with an epilogue set sometime after Order 66. An Imperial shuttle descended through snow onto the surface of the moon where the Venator had crashed. The wreckage was partially buried. Its hull plating rusted and fractured. Stormtroopers in pristine white armor fanned out across the crash site. Darth Vader walked among the graves. Vader moved through the rows of clone helmets. The orange and white markings of the 332nd faded by weather and time. He knelt beside the graves and found Ahsoka's lightsaber half buried in the frozen soil. He picked it up and ignited the blade. Blue reflected off the black mask that had replaced his face. Above him, a convor named Morai circled silently in the gray sky. Vader looked up at the bird. His reflection stared back at him from the cracked visor of a 332nd clone helmet. The face behind the mask was invisible. The man behind the mask was gone. The Clone Wars were never a war. They were an instrument designed to destroy every institution the Republic depended on. The Senate was purchased. The Jedi were wiped out. The military's independence was eliminated. The economy was captured. The public's trust in democracy was eroded until the world itself became a formality. Every battle, every campaign, every heroic sacrifice served the design. The clones who fought the war were manufactured to carry out its final act. The Jedi who led it were destroyed by the army they commanded. And the man who engineered it all watched from the center of the Republic he was dismantling. Applauded by the Senate he had captured, protected by the soldiers he had designed to betray their generals. The darkness was no longer waiting. It was governing. The Clone Wars were never a war, but a machine. The clones who fought it were designed to fire the last shot, and the Jedi who led it were designed to receive it. Quick note before you go, members get early access and a few videos that stay off the main channel. If that's interesting, the link is in the description. Otherwise, here's another video that you might like.